and not worrying about, all this other spiritual mumbo jumbo that other people use as an excuse not to, defeat their own Yetzer Ha. But anyway, Rabbi's here, so I'm done. I'm shutting up.
He just left the room.
Oh no. Did I scare him away?
Maybe. All right. So the good news is it looks like we're live on YouTube and Facebook. Let me double check the Facebook. Oh, it's going to be on my personal page on Facebook right now. Okay. Let's go there and see. All right. Yep. All right. So Rabbi will be with us in just a moment. And there he is. He's coming through the purple wall.
All right. He wrestled the gators and got online. Good job.
What do you say?
He wrestled all the gators in the swamp and made it to online land. Thank you.
Baruch Hashem. You ready? Oh, Heather's disappeared.
She is on limited bandwidth this morning, so she probably is not going to be on video at least.
Yeah,
But,
I'll be here with audio, but not video.
Okay. My internet has been much better lately, but on occasion it makes problems. So you guys let me know. I may not notice it before you. You may notice before me, but I have a hotspot on my phone if necessary. So
All right. So I posted the link. I don't know if you spread that around, Rabbi, to the people, but we're going to be live on YouTube now, and we are live right now on YouTube. If you want to share that link to your friends or enemies.
In that case, or my enemies, I'll do that. Let's see. Where do I find a link for that?
Top secret. Top secret. Actually,
Is
all
it
the
what
links.
It's in WhatsApp and Telegram if you want to copy and paste it from there.
Okay. Computer is going nice and slowly. Okay, Mishnah walk.
And speaking of internet, I am going through a new software that's spreading it to the two different locations. I'm not sure what happens if I lose internet or power, but we'll see. Like normally when I'm on Zoom and you guys are in Zoom, it continues. If I drop out, it'll continue. I'm not sure if that's the case today, so we'll see.
And I don't see it streaming on the Mishnah walk, by the way. I don't know if it's supposed to.
No, it's a different tier level to get it on the Mishnah walk page. It's going to go to my personal page right now.
So we'll no longer be streaming directly to Facebook like we have been?
We may change. We are on Facebook, but we're only on my personal wall.
Oh, okay. So
it'll stream to a profile, but not a page.
I see.
I just shared it to the page too, so it should be on there now too.
All right, that's done. Well, it automatically began recording on my end.
That's good.
I'm not sure if it is actually recording, but it says it's recording. So I don't know. Some different stuff. But let's begin. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
We should do this. I think this is smart to do. If we don't make it a lesson, we just read through it at the beginning so that people will know about Havdalah. We can decide
every week. You want to do that?
Yeah. So you're able to do this Havdalah, the separation between Shabbat and the new week, up to about the midpoint of the week, but you're supposed to do it as soon as Shabbat ends on
Mhm.
Saturday night, right? Once 3 medium-sized stars appear. But if not, you're able to do it until midweek, but you skip over the blessing regarding fire. So if we have anyone who would like to read the English quickly, just read through it quickly.
I can do so. I'm going to skip over the italics.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And skip
Worshipful
over
are
this
you,
one.
O Lord. So I'm going to start with, okay, that's where you want me to read where you highlighted?
No, sir. Skip over this highlighted portion.
Skip over the highlighted portion. Okay. So fourth non-italicized paragraph. Worshipful are you, O Lord, our God, King of the universe, who separates between holy and mundane, light and darkness, Israel and the nations, and between the seventh day and the 6 days of work. Worshipful are you, O Lord, who separates between holy and mundane.
All right. So if you said this and you had intention, you fulfilled the Torah requirement. But what you would normally do is, even if you're doing it on Monday or Tuesday, you would, while holding a cup of grape juice or wine, you would first say this blessing that I've highlighted over the fruit of the vine. After you say it, you don't drink, you keep holding it. Then you say over fragrances, and then you say this, and then you drink. All right, let's continue. Do we have a volunteer for the prayer upon entering a house of study? We can take turns.
Yeah, let me grab a line here. Let's see. Yehi Ratzon Milfaneka.
If there's no dot, no single dot in the chaf,
Mhm.
then it will be a
Manecha.
always, always.
Milfanecha.
Yes, sir. And that, if the final kaf right here, if it has a single dot inside of it, then it would be a regular K sound like in English, but that is extremely rare. If you see a chaf at the end of a word, it's almost always the KH sound, like clearing your throat, like, and it's important to do that even if you don't like the way it sounds.
Milfanecha. Adonai Elohim Elohim Elohai.
Yes, sir. I'll make it a little bigger. All right, so may it be your will before you, O eternal my God. We have another volunteer. Heather, do you want to give it a gander?
Shelo akoshel bidvar halaha.
Excellent. So may it be your will before you, O eternal my God, that I not stumble in a matter of halacha. Ben, you want to give it a shot?
Sure. Sholo Omar al Tameh to excuse Tahor.
There you go, tahor. So, and that I not say regarding what is impure, that it is pure. Do we have any of our members who want to give it a shot?
Baal Tahor Tameh.
Beautiful. Nor should we say regarding what is pure, that it's not pure. Victor, you want to read this bit? Just 3 words.
Wa'al Motar
Moo. Make sure you do ooh like a cow mooing. Wa'al moo.
Wa'al Mutar
There you go.
Asur.
Beautiful. Nor should we say regarding what is mutar, permitted, that it's asur, forbidden. Heather, tur shalach, your turn.
Al asur mutar.
All right. Nor should we say regarding what's forbidden that it's permitted. Ben, tur shalcha, your turn.
Okay. Baal Kashel
Ekashel,
Bidvar.
All right, if we have a dot under a letter, it's an E. Bid, bid.
Bidvar. Halacha.
All right. And in doing so, by not forbidding what is permitted and permitting what's forbidden, we shall not stumble in a matter of halacha, in a matter of the actual implementation of God's commandments. We have a member who wants to volunteer.
I tried.
Bechavod.
Mehu be Raber.
Averai.
Oh no,
Averai.
yeah, Raberai. Real. Yik. I'm sorry. Yikashlu.
All right, so that reading that you just did would be understood, but let's be careful that when we see the dot underneath a letter, that we not pronounce it as an e, but as an e. It's very common, very, very common. So I can't blame you. Very common in the English-speaking Jewish world that they mispronounce this as an e. And so often when people are learning Hebrew, they continue that, and then it becomes the American. I know you're not American, but it's perceived like an American accent in Hebrew. So we want to make sure to pronounce the dot, the vowel, which is a dot, as an E sound. So yeesh, I'm sorry, yeek, yeek instead of yik. Yeek, yiko, yikosh.
Yikashlu.
There you go. Yikoshalu. All right. Tamshichi, continue.
Rabere.
So this line under the resh,
Rabai. Is the
yeah, it's
I
an
sound.
ah. That's right. Haverai.
Raberei. Bidwa.
Od palm. Let's try it again.
Bid.
Notice,
Bid.
is it bid or
Bid.
bead?
Bead.
Bid or bead?
Bead.
There you
Bead.
go.
Bidwa. Halacha.
Excellent. And may my fellows also not stumble in a halacha. Esmah bohem, and I shall rejoice with them. Ken Yehiro, so may it be his will. Excellent, you guys. Good reading. All right. I believe we are on 67. Correct me if I'm wrong. Picking up at 67. We are in the list of the 613 commandments. These are different from other commandments because these are the everlasting, the perpetual conditions of the covenant between God and his people. And this is called the Taryag HaMitzvot, 613 commandments. And this is just a summary list of them. You guys with me?
Yeah, I'm thinking we did 67, but I could be wrong.
All right. Well, we will count as beginning at 68 and we'll read 67 as a quick review.
Sounds good. 67, not to interrupt the watch held around the temple, as Leviticus 18:30 states, and you shall keep my watch.
Who's next?
I'll go. For a priest not to enter the temple building at all times, as Leviticus 16:2 states, and he shall not enter the sanctuary at all times.
For a priest with a disqualifying physical deformity not to proceed beyond the beginning of the altar, as Leviticus chapter 21, verse 23 states. However, to the parochet, he shall not approach.
Parochet. Parochet.
Parochet.
All right, with the parochet. So that is the veil or the curtain that separates between the Holy of Holies and the holy place. All right. Miswa Haba'a.
Mitzvo ani haba.
All right, that's a haba, yefeh. Continue.
For a priest with a disqualifying physical deformity not to serve in the temple, as Leviticus 21:17 states, anyone who has a blemish may not approach to present.
71.
Mitzvah haba'ah.
Miswa.
Mitzvah
Haba'ah.
haba'ah.
You got it.
For a priest with a disqualifying physical deformity of a temporary nature not to serve in the temple, as Leviticus 21:18 states. Anyone who has a blemish may not approach to offer a sacrifice.
Excellent. Miswa haba'ah.
72, for the Levites not to perform the services of the priest, and for the priest not to perform the services of the Levites, as Numbers 18:3 states with regard to the Levites. Neither to the sacred vessels nor to the altar shall they approach, so that they do not die, neither they nor you.
73. Miswa haba'ah.
For a person who is intoxicated not to enter the temple, nor to render a halachic decision, as Leviticus 10:9 states, do not drink wine or strong drink when you enter the tent of testimony. And Ebed 10:11 states, or when you render a decision for the children of Israel.
Right? And we derive from this that it's also forbidden to pray, to do our formal prayers when we are intoxicated. And it's even if you're not extremely intoxicated. Extreme intoxication is actually forbidden for health reasons and for safety reasons. Mild intoxication is permitted as long as you're not doing it excessively all the time, because that could harm you as well. But it's not permitted, even mild intoxication, for serving in the temple, rendering judgments, or for doing any of our prayers. And of course, practically speaking, it's not smart in any circumstance where you need to be cautious and reverent. So ideally, you would never be intoxicated, ideally. But that's not established as a mitzvah, to be clear. Right, mitzvah haba'ah.
For a non-priest not to serve in the temple, as Numbers chapter 18, verse 4 states, an unauthorized person shall not approach them.
All right. Mitzvah haba'ah. If you want to be next and you're a guy, say ani haba. If you're a female, say ani haba'ah.
Ani haba.
Okay, kol hakavod.
For a priest who is ritually impure not to serve in the temple, as Leviticus 22:2 states, and they shall separate themselves from the sacred offerings of the children of Israel.
Mi haba. Who is next? Mi haba.
Ani haba'ah.
Okay, kol hakavod.
For a priest who has immersed himself in a mikveh in order to purify himself from ritual impurity, not to serve in the temple until the conclusion of that day, as Leviticus 21:6 states, and they shall not profane.
Mi haba. Mi means who. Mi haba.
Ani haba.
Yefeh, kol hakavod. Gever.
77. For a priest who is ritually impure not to enter the temple courtyard, as Numbers 5:3 states, and they shall not make your camp impure. This refers to the camp of the divine presence.
Mitzvah
Ani
haba'ah.
haba.
Yefeh, kol hakavod.
For a person who is impure not to enter the camp of the Levites, the parallel for all time being the Temple Mount. As Deuteronomy 23:11 states, do not enter the camp. This refers to the camp of the Levites.
Mitzvah haba'ah.
Ani haba'ah. Not to build the altar with hewn stones, as Exodus chapter 20, verse 22 states, do not make them hewn.
Mi haba. Oh, ba'a.
Ani haba.
Okay.
Do not ascend to the altar using steps, as Exodus 20:23 states, do not ascend my altar with steps.
Ani
Mitzvah
haba'ah.
haba'ah. Yefeh, kol hakavod.
Not to extinguish the fire of the altar, as Leviticus 6:6 states, burn a continuous fire on the altar, do not extinguish it.
Excellent. All right, question you guys. What do you feel about these draconian commandments restricting people from entering into the temple of the Lord?
Ah,
I mean, how bigoted, how backward and primitive. What are your thoughts about this?
horrible. It's
How
horrible.
offended are you?
Oh, greatly offended. I'm going right into the Holy of Holies.
And you're coming out right out as a
Yeah.
charcoal barbecue chicken.
Yeah,
Walk
just talk to
in,
Nahab
walk
and
in. What's
Go
that?
ahead.
talk to Nahab and the sons of Aaron.
Adav and Avihu. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. What
Yeah.
are your guys' thoughts about this? Do you feel that it's unfair? And feel free to disagree. I mean, we're not gonna hit you over the head. We'll just send you into the Holy of Holies to find out yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll give you the big test. Give you the big test.
Any thoughts about it? I mean, of course, it's
Of course.
limiting. It's
There could be
it's
a-
discriminatory. It's for sure
It is
discriminatory.
discriminatory, but I don't think discriminatory is a bad word inherently, and I'll explain because everybody has their own role to play, and because your role is different, you have your own role to play, and I'm not allowed to play that role. I have my role to play, and you're not allowed to play that role. That's discrimination, and that's not a bad thing. And God calls it out. He says, the Levites have their role, the priests have their role, and everyone has to excel in their role, and there has to be a separation. There's between the sacred and the profane in everything that you do. And so if you have to realize what your role is, appreciate your role, not covet the roles of everyone else, and do something stupid. I don't think there's anything wrong with discrimination inherently in and of itself. Discrimination is a vital thing, a vital, I think it's vital in understanding what our role is and what our role isn't.
So it's
As
kind of like the word judgment, where judgment could be bad if it's unjust, unreasonable, irrational judgment. But if you want to throw judgment out the window, that's not love or fair either, because then you're not exercising judgment. But then you're going to cross the road without looking, because you're not judging whether it's safe to cross the road, and then your children will have no father, and your wife will lose her husband. Right? The same thing here. So discrimination can be bad, but the word itself, as you said, is not inherently bad.
Exactly. We have to understand what our role is individually and corporately and assume that, and then understand at the same time, alternately, what our role is not as a person and corporatively, and respect that.
Right. Can someone give some examples of how, in certain groups, these commandments especially are used to show the inferiority of God's everlasting covenant with the people of Israel? He didn't really get it right the first time, apparently. So
Oh, ouch.
these are
Ouch.
some of the favorite sort of commandments that serve as an example of the inferiority of God's everlasting commandment. Who can give us some examples of how that is an inconsistent way of viewing them? The same people who make those claims, those criticisms of the Old Testament,
I can do this all day, but I'm gonna
are inconsistent. They're inconsistent with how they approach things in their own theology. So can you give some examples how the same reasoning is not applied fairly in other religions or in other circumstances?
Of course. I mean, I could do this all day, but I'm going to restrain myself because coming from a former faith system that did not respect roles, their scriptures specifically say in Christ. There is no Jew, there is no Greek, there's no male, there's no roles. Everyone can do whatever they want
Right.
to do, but whatever they feel the Spirit of God is pushing them or compelling them to do. That is totally the opposite of this very ordained role and structure that Hashem put in place for us to follow.
Right. So it certainly is in contradiction to it. But can someone give an example of how, assuming you don't believe in the Bible, all right, you don't have respect for the Torah, how might we see the irrationality of a completely limitless framework would be impractical, right? Give some examples of how to apply a approach that doesn't respect boundaries would be irrational and impractical, even if you're someone who doesn't ascribe to the Bible. Right? Think about schools or jobs or governments. If you apply that same absolute egalitarian approach, what would happen? And let's say you're a student in a school and you don't like what the teacher said.
It'd be total anarchy.
Yeah, what? You're just going to say, I'm equally entitled to be the leader of the class? You know, imagine some little kid doesn't like what the teacher says, so he marches into the office and he says, "You're fired. I'm the principal now." It's absurd. What kind of society? That wouldn't be a society, right?
I would
Think of
argue we've been heading that way quite a bit,
definitely.
enabling the kids to disrespect elders at the very least, much less their parents.
Definitely.
When I see an example of this from the faith side, as Ben was touching on, my response to them is usually, "Oh, I think Cora would agree with you."
Korah, yeah,
Cora,
yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
Because yeah. Because it's like he did not like the role he was given, and he had a great role. He had a very high ranking, and he's like, no, I want to be way up there.
And he used a very similar justification that is used in certain splinter groups that rebelled against the people of Israel, the heritage of Israel, and were like, "Oh, we know better." What did he use? What did he say? You, Moses, are making yourself out to be like something special, but we're all holy, and the Lord is among us all. The Lord can be among us all, but that doesn't contradict the fact that the Lord has established distinctions of positions and roles, right? So, like Ben mentioned with regard to the teachings in the writings of Paul, and goes without saying, this is not an endorsement of the writings of Paul, but assuming someone wants to quote that as some kind of an example of authority for justifying complete and total egalitarianism, complete and total irrelevance of distinctions, Paul said there's neither male or female, Greek nor Jew, right? But do you think Paul applied that same reasoning when it came to the commandments of God? Clearly not. Unless you want to throw out his writings regarding the engaging in same-sex intercourse in the context of idolatry in the beginning of the book of Romans. Suddenly, there is a difference between male and female. Well, what do you know? You know, this exposes the disingenuity and the irrationality of taking words out of context, and why it's so important to look when people make ridiculous claims, to re-examine the passage that they're supposedly basing it on and see if it is in harmony with the surrounding text. Paul said male and female, there's no difference in Christ. But what's he talking about? He's not talking about roles within everyday reality. He's talking about before God with regard to one's righteousness before God, with regard to salvation or eternal life. He says there's no Greek or Jew in Christ. But yet he clearly had Timothy circumcised. Why? His mother was Jewish. The leaders of the Jerusalem Council in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 21, clearly made a distinction between Greeks and Jews with regard to the expectations for being members of their community, right? For the Jewish people, they held that they should continue to keep the Torah. They should keep the entirety of the Torah as it applies to them. And for those who are not Jewish, they held that they shouldn't be coerced as a prerequisite for interacting with their community, but that they should keep certain basic minimums. And that's a whole nother question, but they clearly made a difference between Greek and Jew, male and female. The cliche, there's neither male nor female, Greek nor Jew, is only with regard to one's uprightness before God, one's relationship before God as a undeserved son or daughter of the king, right? That's all it's talking about. Yes, sir. You had something to say, Mr.
I was just going to say it could be regarding their value, their inherent value. There's no difference in inherent value between a man and a woman, Greek and a Jew.
But
even
the
in
way
Judaism,
that
I mean, we realize that Greeks or whatever, the rights of the nations have a place in the world to come.
Right, right. And that no difference in value, again, is only with regard to these eternal principles. But there are differences in value in everyday life with regard to certain roles. Someone who's not equipped for a certain role has less value than someone who is equipped for a certain role, but only with regard to that role, right? So we have to distinguish between what we're talking about when we talk about value. Same thing with everything else, context, right? If someone's looking for a wife, they want to have a family. I'm sorry, but doesn't matter how much I might identify as a woman, I don't have the same value for reproductive purposes as a woman who is actually a woman. You know what I'm saying? There are differences in
Biologically
value.
speaking, yes. Yeah.
Say what?
Yeah, biologically speaking, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But with regard, again, to value when it comes to spiritual matters, when it comes to being a light of God's goodness in the world, yeah, it's all the same. There's neither male nor female, Greek nor Jew. Right? And that's whether or not one considers the writings of Paul authoritative, right? So in that
Question.
case, yes, sir.
The commandment 69 and 70. I don't know if you want to pull that up or if you have it still open.
Yes, sir.
All right, where are we going? Here we go. The priest with a deformity.
Yes.
All right, or we have it seems redundant here. They shouldn't go beyond the parochit, but if you have 70 is established, he wouldn't be anywhere near it anyway. That's what I'm
Let
kind of
me reread
confusing
it.
me.
Let me
Okay.
reread it. All right. שלא יכנס בעל מום מן המזבח ולפנים. So this is talking about that a person who has a disqualifying condition of specific types,
Mhm.
that he should not enter from the altar inward. And now 70, شلو يعبد بعل مum. All right, so the difference here is this is talking about one who's serving, doing specific acts that are commanded. And I'm sorry, 70 is talking about serving, doing specific acts that are commanded if he has certain features. And this one is not talking about serving. This one's talking about entering from the altar and inward. So I'm not an expert on these mitzvot, so I could be leaving something out, as we've stated every week. And it's important to keep in mind, these are just summaries. But just looking at it cursory and having a bit of familiarity, not expert familiarity, but a bit of familiarity, one might say, okay, he can't serve if he has one of these disqualifying features, but maybe he can enter in any case, as long as he's not serving. Maybe he wants to enter in order to pray, because he gets greater inspiration or greater, he's more motivated to pray if he's nearer, or maybe he wants to go in simply to speak to someone who is serving in there. So one might say, okay, he can enter in beyond the altar into the actual holy place and not violate 70 because he's not serving. He's just going there for another purpose. So that could be a distinction between these two. Did that make any sense?
Yeah, I'm trying to picture. I know that priests that are disqualified usually have to exit the temple area because they sleep there. They wake up and they're like, "Oops, I can't serve today." They actually have to go down and they actually exit through a triangular gate.
Well, that sounds like you're talking about someone who's disqualified for a temporary reason, not because of a mum. And this is talking about
not like an ear cut. Oh, okay.
Right. This is clearly talking about a mum, which is a bit more of a permanent condition. And these two are distinguished between a temporary. See, the next one is talking about temporary. So it doesn't seem like these are talking about temporary condition.
So someone with 8 fingers is not doing not allowed in there.
Right. Now, perhaps if you recovered from some condition that is generally permanent, but somehow it remedied itself, probably they'd be able to go in. I'm
Like
sure
a broken arm, maybe?
so I'm not the authority on
Yeah.
this, and also even our sages of the Talmudic era probably didn't even conceive of certain things even being feasible, so they didn't even talk about it. But I mean, now we know that there are all kinds of potentials to remedy some of these issues. All right, any other questions regarding the 13 of the 613 that we just read today? And if anyone feels like there should be no separation between administrators and the general population, please feel free to continue the lesson, because there's no distinction between administrator and it's bigoted and unjust and primitive that there should be, leaders, every man for himself. So please continue, whoever would like. We'll be waiting. I can't hear you, Victor.
Doing what's right in your own eyes.
Correct. All right, bo'u namshich. Sefer HaMitzvot. While I go there, someone speak up and let us know what is the difference between Sefer HaMitzvot and what we just read. Someone
Well,
summarize.
as you mentioned, that what we just read was very cursory, very concise. The actual command with no explanation. Here we're going to get a little bit of explanation.
All right, so last week so in Sefer HaMitzvot, you get about 1 to 2 paragraph explanations, as well as a reference at the end where you can find the elaboration on these commandments in even greater detail, where you can find it in the Talmud as well as where you can find it in the Mishneh Torah, and it also tells you where in the text of the Torah you can find it.
So it will not necessarily, and it does, I'm sure, goes right to the source, but it'll also go to the discussion and the agreement of
right, a finalized ruling regarding. That's
Okay.
right. Psak halacha. All right, so we left off with proactive commandment 21. Is that correct?
Yes, we read 21 last week.
So it's Wa'aseh 22. Mi haba. Who's next? Mi haba.
Mihaba.
Kol hakavod.
That is, that he commanded us to guard the temple and to constantly walk around it, to honor it, to exalt it, and to aggrandize it. That is his saying to Aharon, while you and your sons under your charge are before the tent of the testimony, Numbers 18:2. And this command has already been repeated with different language, and that is his saying, and keep the charge of the tent of meeting, Numbers 18:4. And it is written in the Sifrei Bamidbar, 161.
Sifrei.
Sifrei. Yes, Sifrei Bamidbar 161. While you and your sons under your charge are before the tent of testimony, the priests within and the Levites outside. And in the Mechilta, they said,
Good.
Is that what, I'm sorry?
Yes, sir. That was good. Mechilta. That's good.
Mechilta, they said, and keep the charge of the tent of meeting. This tells me only that it is with a positive commandment. From where do we know that it is also with a negative commandment? Hence we learn to say, and you shall keep the charge of the sanctuary. Behold, it has been made clear to you that guarding the temple is a positive commandment. And there it is said, it is an
aggrandizement.
Yes, to the temple, that it has guardians. And a palace that has guardians is not the same as a palace that does not have guardians. And it is well known that palace is a name for the temple chamber. They said that the aggrandizement and exaltation of the chamber is generated by the presence of the guards that are assigned to it. And the regulations of this commandment have already all been explained in tractates Tamid and Midot. See Parashat Korach, Mishneh Torah, the Chosen Temple 1.
Beautiful. Do you guys feel like reading one more? I feel like we read this last week.
I
Could be
think we
wrong.
did too. I must have written down the wrong one.
Read, it's not your fault. 23. Let's get someone else to read now. Proactive commandment 23.
And that is that the only Levites were commanded to serve in the temple in specific types of service, such as shutting the gates and reciting song at the time of the sacrifice. And that is his, may he be exalted and praised, saying, and the Levite shall serve. And this is the language of the Sifre. I would understand that if he wishes, he serves, and if he does not wish, he does not serve. Hence we learn, and the Levite shall serve, even against his will. That is to say that it is an obligatory command, that it is placed upon him by force, and that is the service of the Levites. And it has already been explained in several places in Tamid and Midot, and is also explained in the second chapter of Arachim.
Beautiful.
That only the Levites could recite song during the temple service. And the command for this commandment was already repeated with different language, and that is his saying, and he shall serve in the name of the Lord his God, like all his fellow Levites. And they said in the second chapter of Arahim, what is service that must be in the name of the Lord? You must say that it is song.
All right, beautiful. So we see that singing to God is an act of service. It's a type of religious service to God. Some people say that because singing or prayer are not I believe there are 4, it could be 5, I could be, I think it's 4 specific acts that a person is liable for idolatry if they do them to any other thing other than the Creator, even if those acts are not the way that those objects or things are generally worshipped, right? And that's, for example, prostration or sacrifice or libation. Could be 3. What is the other? Prostration, sacrifice, libation, incense. I think that's it. And so these, if you do them to anything other than the Creator as an act of devotion, a ritualized act of devotion, then you're liable for idolatry, even if these are not the ways that that object of devotion is normally served. And that's in contrast to other modes of service that may be innovated by practitioners of different religions as ways of serving their idols and false gods. So, for example, if there's a false god that is worshipped by throwing stones at it, then you will be equally liable if you throw stones at it as you would have been if you had prostrated to it. But unlike prostration, which you would be liable for if you served anything with prostration, if you served some other idol by throwing a stone at it, and throwing stones at it is not the way it's normally served, then you would not be getting the same penalty. Why? Because it's not the way it's normally served. It doesn't mean it's permitted to do so. Doesn't mean it's permitted to serve an idol even in a way it's not normally served. It's still forbidden, but the penalty is not as severe. So with regard to singing, some people say that because singing or prayer are not one of those acts of worship that you're liable for all false gods, therefore, if somebody is singing or praying to something other than God, that is permitted. This is a huge error, huge error. The mere fact that it's not one of the universally prohibited acts, as specified as one of the universally prohibited acts, doesn't mean that it's permitted. And who can give us a classic example that anti-Semites use for something along these lines from the Talmud? There's a classic example where the Talmud says that a person is exempt if they do a horrendous thing. And anti-Semites would say, Because it says exempt, therefore it's saying it's permitted. And they come to this conclusion because they don't understand how Talmudic law works. Anybody think of that example? It's a horrible thing.
I'll take a hint.
So
Can
as
I
a
buy
general,
a vowel?
go ahead. You
Can
buy
I,
a vowel.
can I buy a vowel or 50-50?
So as a general rule, when you're learning halakha, when you're learning Jewish law from classical sources, if it is stated that action XYZ is exempt, or that the person who does action XYZ is exempt, that does not mean that it's permitted. That should always be in the back of your mind. And very often it means it's not permitted, but the penalty is different somehow from the main focus of the discussion at hand.
That's
So
like the penalty is not carried out by the people or the court.
Well, there may be a penalty for the
Yeah.
action that's described as you being exempt for, but the penalty may be due to another reason and not for the reason that's being discussed. So, for example, we were just talking about idolatry, right? If you worship a false god by singing to it, right? If that's your way of worshiping it, so if it says that you're exempt and the topic at hand is the types of worship that you're forbidden to do to anything, even if it's not the way that objects normally worshipped. It may say you're exempt for that. That doesn't mean you're permitted to worship that idol. It just means you're exempt from the punishment for those universal acts of worship, right? Prostration, sacrifice, and so forth. So if God forbid, one of you worshipped my mailbox outside by jumping in front of it 5 times, well, you would be exempt from the acts of prohibited worship that are universal to all things. You would be exempt from that, but that doesn't mean you'd be exempt even from a death penalty. You may still get a death penalty if that's the way that object is usually worshipped. So you could still get even a death penalty, but you'd be exempt for violating another prohibition. So the point is that being exempt from the penalty of one prohibition doesn't mean you're exempt from the consequences of other prohibitions. So the classic anti-Semitic example of this that I was giving is the rape of a boy who's under 9 years old. So the reason for this, and it's actually very interesting, is because the sages of Israel did not understand the well-known passage that forbids intercourse between 2 males. They did not understand that as referring specifically to children under a certain age. So a person could come along and say, "Oh, see, they're permitting rape of a child. This is disgusting that they would even." Our sages would be flabbergasted if they thought that anybody would come to that conclusion. But rather, because they're nuanced in the reading of verses, more nuanced than most fundamentalist people are, and they notice that verse says ish, man, and then it says zachar, which means male. So there's 2 distinct words used there, and you need to ask yourself, why didn't it say a man lies with a man? You would expect man lies with man if it's going to be completely equivalent, but instead the Hebrew there has 2 different words in reference to males. One is man and one is zachar, which is more general. So the sages made a distinction for the same reason, because the text makes a distinction. Now that doesn't mean that you're permitted to do, God forbid, such a disgusting thing to a child. What it means is, though, that you would be liable for other reasons. You'd be liable for harming or for, of course, raping, but you wouldn't be liable for that specifically. In the same way that, if a animal had done something, God forbid, to someone, that animal is not liable for this because it doesn't refer to the animal. So ish refers generally to an adult man, doesn't refer to a child, right? And this is true for many different commandments. People have to be much more nuanced if they take the commandments seriously. sometimes that means that things aren't always what we've been raised to think, right? Any questions about that? I know that's a hot one, but it's important for you to
Well,
know because it's a common anti-Semitic trope, even you could say.
I would say it was a little hard to follow what you were saying at the end, but maybe another example, like someone steals a gun and murders with it. He may not get arrested for stealing the gun, or he may not.
To keep it simple,
Yeah.
it would be that he could be punished for both. He would be liable for both, but
they may drop the charge on the one, it's
right,
like
right.
because we're dealing with something that's much more
even more
important.
severe, even more severe. But that is a good example of showing how there's more than one side of a prohibition. It's not just, oh, sin is sin and all sin is the same. That's a uneducated approach. You could say that all sin is some kind of a mistake, of one mistake or another, but not all mistakes are the same. And as you gave an example, if somebody stole a weapon and then used it to murder someone, you could at least ask the question, are we going to charge him for the murder? Are we going to charge him for the stealing, or are we going to charge him for both? And then you could ask the same question regarding the punishment. Are we going to punish him for the stealing? Are we going to only punish him for the murder? Or are we going to charge him for both? Right? So even if you say, even if you say that we're only going to charge him for apply the penalty of murder on him, so we kill him, and we're not going to charge him for the penalty of theft, that's not saying that the theft is something that's permitted. Right. And we're speaking hypothetically here. To say that we're not going to first make him get 70 lashes, who knows what, and then work for a year to earn the income that was lost from the person whose weapon he stole. Let's say that weapon was the means of livelihood for the person he stole it from. Then simply giving him a weapon back is not justice. You also have to compensate for all of the loss as much as would be possible. So do we do that? Or do we just kill the guy? Yeah. Even if you decide you just kill the guy because he murdered, that doesn't mean that the theft was permitted, right? Any questions? I know this seems like legalese, but if you live in a world where the Torah is actually being applied in real life, and it's not just a hypothetical feel-good book, but you actually take it seriously, then these things are just as relevant with regard to the Torah, with regard to the Bible, as it is with any government on earth. And if anything, you look at the law codes of the United States, it's way thicker than the Torah. It's way more nuanced than the Torah. Because if you live something practically in real life, you have all these different scenarios and questions that come up. Anyone want to add anything? Speechless.
We're in awe.
All right, let's go on. So we are going to move into Hebrew now. If there are no questions for the topics we just brought up. Hebrew. Who's excited? Ben. All right. So first let's do it. Heather put like a little confetti horn thing.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
I think
guy.
Ben is with us for about 8 more seconds, so maybe he should
All right, Ben, you have a Shavua Tov. Birkat Hashem Alecha. God's blessings be upon you. 3, 2, 1. Shavua Tov. Chodesh Tov. So today our focus is Hebrew. I think before we get into what we have planned, we can give an opportunity to any of our members or anyone following online. They can enter their questions. If you have any questions that have come up recently or on the top of your head right now regarding Hebrew, this would be a good time to ask. For our members, of course, you can speak up. Any questions regarding anything regarding Hebrew, the language of the Bible, something you saw in this last week's Torah portion, anything. How about you, Mr. Victor?
Well, He can see the smoke coming off of my head there or something sometimes. To me, I guess my thing is, how do I get into a daily habit of Hebrew? What's the best way? Because I find myself picking up, Hebrew 7 days later, and it's frustrating. It's embarrassing, as well. I do the prayers in English, a little bit of Hebrew on some of the more familiar prayers, but it's more from memory than reading. But is there a tool or something or a something you would suggest? And would kind of guess that it's probably going to the Siddur and doing a little bit in Hebrew every day. But is that your best answer for that?
I am going to show you something in 1 second, and I'm working on this. I'm working on a Siddur that will incrementally lead a person to implementing more Hebrew in their daily prayers without throwing it on them all at once. So let's use the Shema, for example. Share my screen. You guys can see my screen? You can see
Yes,
my
sir.
screen, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Let's use the Shema for example, and you would apply this to any major section of daily prayers. So if you're familiar with daily prayer in Torah observance, you would know that there are not just a bunch of verses, but there's certain major sections. So, for example, you have the recitation of the Psalms 145 through 150 before we say Shema. Really, that should only be done if you're beginning your prayer before sunrise. But in most places, they do this regardless of when they're starting. So Psalm 145 through Psalm 50, that's one major section. That's called Pesukei de Zimra. And then the next major section is the blessings that are associated with the morning Shema. So that is these blessings right here that you're looking at. So we have the Psalms, Pesukei de Zimra, then we have the blessings of Shema, and then we have the Shema itself, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, and the associated scriptural passages. Then after that, you have the final blessings of Shema. And then you have the standing prayer, the Amidah, also known as the Shemona Esrei. So you see how there are major sections, right? Not just verses and paragraphs, but major sections. Yes?
Ken.
Yes. Okay. Now, my suggestion is that for each section, if you have a level of Hebrew that several of you have, where you're able to read in Hebrew, but maybe you read a little bit slowly, then instead of just jumping into where everything's in Hebrew and it's so much, so overwhelming, you're not going to do it. What instead you can do is you can have a Siddur, a prayer book that has Hebrew and English side by side, which are widely available. And what you can do is when you begin a section, so let's say, for example, the Psalms, Psalm 145 through Psalm 150, you can say the first verse in Hebrew. So you would say the first verse in Hebrew, and then all the rest of it you say in English. Then when you get to the next chapter, Psalm 146, you say the first verse in Hebrew, then all the rest in English. When you get to Psalm 147, say the first verse in Hebrew, then all the rest in English. When you say the first verse of each section in Hebrew, first say it in English so you have an idea of what you're saying, and then say that one verse in Hebrew. Everything else in English to keep things meaningful for you. When you get to the blessings of Shema, read the first line in English. So, for example, here you would say, worshipful are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who forms light and creates darkness, makes peace and creates all things. Then you would say it in Hebrew, just this first line. Baruch atah Yoser or v'rei choshech, oseh shalom v'rei et hakol. And then everything else you say in English. You get to another section, you do the same thing. So for Shema, for example, I don't think you need to say this in English if you already know it. You know, you probably. Can you guys still see me? I just made my computer like fly.
Yeah, heard it got a little quiet for a second, but everything's still up. So
Okay,
you're
great.
saying the Shema it's so familiar, go ahead and do it. Is it possible that we're not pronouncing it, or that the vast majority of people don't actually pronounce words correctly? Or is it
course.
pretty common that they do?
Of course, most people don't pronounce words correctly, but as long as it's approximately recognizable, that's better than nothing. Pronunciation can be improved over time. And there's something called intelligibility, which means you may not be pronouncing something exactly the same, but it's still intelligible, it's still understandable. As long as your pronunciation is intelligible, then it's usable, even if it's not perfect. And no one's Hebrew is absolutely perfect, but there are certainly different degrees of of clarity. Let's put it that way. But although I do put a lot of emphasis on proper pronunciation of classical Hebrew, it's a mistake to become overly fixated. And I don't think I'm overly fixated. If you're trying to learn Hebrew, don't become overly fixated when you're just trying to learn the words. With time, you can improve your pronunciation. The main thing is that you understand the words and the words are intelligible. So, yeah. But the main point I wanted you guys to get is not with regard to pronunciation, but with simply reading the Hebrew. That you would read the first line in Hebrew of each section, read it in English, then read in Hebrew, only the first line. Everything else read in English. And you don't need to do this with every single section. You can implement it at your ease as you progress. So when you're first starting, maybe only do that for 2 different sections of Jewish prayer. Don't do it for every chapter of Psalm 145 through Psalm 150. Maybe just do it for the first Psalm and then everything else in English. You get to the Shema, say the first line in Hebrew, say this in English: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your life, and with all your resources. Then say this and only this in Hebrew, everything else in English. And when you're ready, when that becomes easier for you, then you can do the same thing for the next section. You would say this only in Hebrew, in English, and then in Hebrew, and then all the rest only in English. Does anybody have any questions about that? I know I've spoken at length already.
But you said you were working on something. Do you mean just the Siddur itself, or do you working on a way that you
On a
can
Siddur
see?
that begins with providing the English, all and not with Hebrew and English on 2 sides, but just one format, right?
Mhm.
But the format will be that the first line of Shema, for example, let's say at the beginning level, everything is in English, but only the Shema, it'll be in English, then in Hebrew, just
Mhm.
that one line, and then everything else is in English. That would be step 1. Then there'll be another step, step 2. Once a person's ready, once they've mastered that first line of the Shema, step 2 will have all the prayers again. But instead of just the Shema, we will have for several other sections, just the first line in Hebrew, and then everything else in English. And then
Okay.
step 3, we'll have the first 2 lines in Hebrew, everything else in English. And step by step, they will get more and more Hebrew. That's the idea.
Great idea. Got my
And
mind thinking.
it just takes a long time to do this, like unless you're gonna make a sloppy job. You guys are quiet. Anything on your mind?
I know this is something I've struggled with too. But when I've researched, people that learn, lots of languages and multiple languages, something they recommend is listening to the language every day. And I
That's
know that
critical.
Rabbi Yosef has lots of recorded prayers on his YouTube channel. So if you're, learning one of those prayers, you could you could listen to that maybe every day in addition to,
The
reading
more
one line in Hebrew.
if a person is serious about trying to learn a language, any language, it's not enough that you just spend 15 minutes a day once a week. And it's not enough to just join a class for 1 hour a week. You have to figure out ways to incorporate it into your life every single day as much as you can. It doesn't, of course, need to be to the extent that it's impeding your relationship with your wife and your kids, but there are plenty of opportunities where you can incorporate learning a language into your daily life without it impeding your relationship with your wife and kids. When you're driving in your car, listening to the radio, or listening to your favorite music, start making a point to listen to your target language, even if you don't know what is being said. You need to expose yourself to hearing the words and the comprehension, audible comprehension through hearing. That's usually going to advance more quickly than the ability to speak, almost always. But it's also good to try to speak as much as you can. So when you're alone in your car, or when you're riding your lawnmower, whatever you're doing, you could have ear pods listening to it and try to repeat to yourself. Over time, you'll start to notice words, even if you're not focusing on word lists. You will begin to notice words here and there and recognize them, even if you don't know what they mean. If you've already reached the point where you recognize what a word sounds like, even if you don't know what it means, then once you look it up, it's going to stick. The meaning will stick much more easily than if you try to force feed your head a whole list of words. Right? So listening is super important. That's great advice, Heather. Maybe try to watch one Hebrew movie once a week. You really want to make it a habit, but watch a Hebrew movie just once a week. That's in addition to exposing yourself to Hebrew while you're driving, while you're doing chores, maybe when you're at the gym, maybe when you're preparing a meal, when you're cooking. There are many opportunities. You can write on little notepads I have here. But don't be like me and have this lying around for years not using it. But you have these little notepads. These are separate. This is not one page. These are little tabs. You could put all the purple ones. You could have Hebrew. Very good. Yeah, look at that. You could have Hebrew written here, transliterated, and maybe another one in Hebrew letters. Or you can put both if you write small and that doesn't bother you. Put Hebrew and English transliterated. But you put this, you can put it in your books, like what you've done.
Well, yeah, like I got it pointing to really neat things that I'm learning and as I read the
There are
Mishnah.
many uses for these kinds of little tabs, but you can also stick them on areas of your house that you see or encounter or refer to frequently. So put on a little corner of your fridge, mekharer. That's how you say fridge in Hebrew. You can put in your mirror, mar'ah. You can put on your table counter on the side somewhere, shayish, and just glance at it every time you see it and start referring to it as that.
On the
There are
Hanukkah,
so
on the
many options.
menorah, the spices, the towel that you're gonna do, wash your hands and do the blessing.
Step by
That's a
step.
good idea. Yeah.
All right, so I'll give you guys one more opportunity to speak up if anybody has a question about anything in Hebrew that you've read or had a question about lately. One final thing I'd mention on issue of advice is try to read the weekly Torah portion in Hebrew. If reading the whole thing is too much, which would make sense, then just make a point to read at least one of the 7 aliyot, one of the 7 major sections of the weekly Torah portion. Read it twice in Hebrew. Read it in English first and then twice in Hebrew. Not being obsessed with trying to understand each and every word, but just saying it out loud so you can hear yourself reading. And that's along the same lines of exposing yourself to just hearing the words. And with time, you'll start to notice the patterns.
So I've got a question.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you pronounce ayin if there's no vowel attached?
There will always be a vowel attached to the letter ayin. If you don't see a
Right,
vowel,
but if there's
Go ahead.
if there's
Go
not
ahead.
one directly below it, because I've
That's
seen
the
that a few
question.
times.
That's the question. If you do not see a vowel directly above the ayin or directly below the ayin, it still has a vowel. Your question would be, where is it? So I'll see if I can find an example for you quickly.
Be the next letter.
It's always going to be, if it's not above or below it, it will be of the previous letter. But there's always going to be, if there's not a mistake in the text, there's always going to be a vowel either above the ayin, below the ayin, or there'll be a vowel under the previous letter if the ayin is the last letter in the word. But that's not so common. If it's in the middle of a word, there's going to be a vowel above or below it, or there'll be a shava. If there's a shava, then that would mean that the ayin is the final consonant sound of the previous letter's vowel, right? So for example, ayin. Oh, look at all the ayins. They're everywhere. They're everywhere, but I don't see them. You might see, for example, here, I've highlighted. You might see, for example, here, you don't see a vowel directly above or below it, but the vowel that's between this ayin and the next letter, this little dot right here, that is the vowel of the ayin. So the vowel might be right here, and you may mistake it as not belonging to the ayin, but it does. Let's see another example.
That one seems kind of obvious, actually.
Yeah, it almost always it's going to be extreme. If there's not a vowel above or below the ayin, then the ayin is going to be at the end of the word, which is not very common. Oh, Shema. Even though it's not common, there is a common example of it. So let's go to the Shema. So in the Shema, there is no vowel above or below. Here we go. There's no vowel above or below, but it still has a vowel. The vowel is this vowel right here, the line under the mem. Now, how could that be? It could be because ayin is a consonant. It's not silent. It's a consonant, not a vowel, but it does always have a vowel. So that means that this is what's called a closed syllable. There are two main types of syllables. You have open syllables and closed syllables. An open syllable is where a syllable consists of a consonant and a vowel. And then you have a different syllable after that. So open syllable is just a consonant and a vowel. So that means that the vowel is opened to the next syllable. A closed syllable is where within one syllable, you have a consonant, a vowel, and then a consonant. And that's one syllable that contains two consonants. Can someone give us an example of an closed syllable? We have them in English. This exists in every language. I'm looking at many of them in the example. I'm looking at many examples right now as I see all your names. So someone give us an example of a closed syllable. That would be consonant, vowel, consonant. To be clear, vowels are sounds that are simply variations of the flow of air in your mouth without any obstruction of the air, and you're vocalizing it. So those are sounds like ah, ee, ooh, ooh. All of these, there's a free flow of air, whereas consonants are like b, k, t. These all obstruct the flow of air. So A, E, I, O, U in English are the vowels, and all other letters are consonants. Who can give us an example of a closed syllable? A syllable is a basic part of a word. Like
Dan.
the word, go ahead.
Dan.
Dan. That is a closed syllable. That's right. Why is it closed? How do you know?
Because it's got a consonant on each end.
That's right. The vowel that's in that syllable is closed. It's closed off from the next syllable. Someone give us an example of an open syllable. Open syllable is just consonant, vowel. Consonant, vowel. Hi. Well, hi, the I could be like a diphthong, so that's not a good one. Ha. Ha.
So,
Go ahead. Yes, so excellent. S-O. That's an open syllable. The vowel of that syllable in so is opened to the next syllable of a sentence, for example. All right, so keeping that in mind, let's go back to our example here. Shema is a two-syllable word. Sh and ma. Shema. The ayin is part of a closed syllable. The two consonants are the mem and the ayin, and the vowel is ah. So this, in a closed syllable, the one vowel within it is associated with both consonants. So this ah, the line under the mem here, this ah is the vowel of the mem, so that's ma, and it's also the vowel of the ayin. Ah, ah. So ma, shema. So even though there's no vowel above or below it, it does have a vowel. If you don't see a vowel anywhere, neither before or after anywhere, then it's a mistake in the text. That occasionally happens. Now, the letter aleph is different. Aleph is a consonant sound. It's not just a silent letter, as is often taught. Aleph does have a consonant sound, but unlike ayin, aleph sometimes truly has no vowel associated with it. And when that happens, the aleph is truly silent. So aleph has a consonant sound only when it has a vowel associated with it. And when there is no vowel associated with it, you treat it as if it's not there. Excuse me. But aleph almost always has a vowel. Okay, you guys. Any other questions? Maybe we can do a quick little quiz. Who feels like a pop quiz? Get your notebooks and your pens and pencils ready. Pen and pencils, notebooks. Excuse me. You guys ready?
Ken.
Say muchanim. Mu, M as in mother, like a cow. Muchanim. All right, muchanim means ready, plural. It's the plural of ready. Victor, we can't hear you. I don't know if you want to say
Well, I
something.
was muted. Muchanim. Muchanim.
Good. Everybody say muchanim. That means we're ready. Okay, so
Because im would be
plural.
we.
It doesn't mean we, it's just plural. So
Right.
in Hebrew present tense, there's
If I was
no
saying I was ready, I wouldn't say that.
correct.
Okay.
Correct. But in present tense Hebrew, there is no true grammatical present tense in Hebrew. So what you use is a type of a word that, unlike we don't have this in English. You use a type of a word that can be used both for first person, second person, or third person. And you know from context or from other words added to it, whether it's we are ready or they are ready. So muchanim is plural. It means ready, and it can be used as a noun, but it's not specifically we. We just know from context that it's we. All right, so muchanim, we're ready. I'm going to ask you guys terms, words that I frequently use interspersed in our English conversations. So these are common terms when you're speaking with Mr. Yosef, all right? And I want you to try to make it a habit to use these terms when you're speaking with each other as well, at least in the context of learning Torah. And if you don't know any of these terms, write them down. They are common. Number one, tagid, tagid, tagid. Two syllables, T-A-G-E-E-D, tagid. If you know what tagid means, then tell me.
tell.
Very good. You guys are great. So tagid means tell. It can also mean like say, depends on or declare, depends on context. So what does the li mean? If I say tagid li,
I tell.
what is the
Or tell me.
yes? So the li is two affixes. It's a le, which is to, and the e is me. Li is to me. So tell to me, i.e., tell me. Tagidli, tell to me. All right. Milah haba'a, next word. What does milah mean? Maze milah. What is milah? Come on, you guys. Feel free to answer multiple times because people are shy.
To
So,
who?
so
Who's me?
milah.
Oh, me?
Milah.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Milah.
That's one word, by the way, milah.
To who?
No, it's one word.
So if you make it two separate words, milah, that could mean who is for her. But that's if it's two separate words.
Okay.
Milah is one word, milah. Milah is a word, a single written word, milah.
Is it in reference or in relation to an offering?
You're thinking maybe an olah. An olah
Maybe,
is a type of
maybe.
olah means an ascending offering or a burnt offering.
Burnt.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean burnt. It just refers to a burnt offering. Yeah, olah means an ascension offering. But you guys don't write that down unless you just want extra work. So milah means word, and it's related to the Hebrew word for circumcision. They're the same word. So milah means circumcision, and milah also means word.
It's like Brit Milah.
That's right. Brit is covenant, milah is circumcision. So what's the connection between a word and circumcision? So the word milah literally means cut. So a milah in a sentence, a word in a sentence is like a little cut out part of a sentence. It's like a cut of the sentence. And circumcision is a cut, right? So that's the idea. Now it adds extra meaning to when God commands us to circumcise our hearts. So it's a word play. To have your heart circumcised is to have his word in your heart. The Bible is full of word plays that get lost when we translate it. Okay, so if milah means word, then who can tell us how do you say next word? Next word. Remember, milah is feminine because it ends with an a he at the end.
Milah haba'a.
Beautiful, Heather. High five. Milah haba'a. Who can tell us how to say verse? How do you say verse in Hebrew? Like a verse of the Bible.
Pasuk.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, very good. Pasuk. Teachers. Pasuk. Pasewq. You can use an EW to represent an U sound or a letter U. Make sure, though, if you use the letter U for transliterating U sounds, make sure you don't mispronounce it as an when I'm transliterating for beginners, I don't like to use the letter U for U sounds because they almost always, if English is their native language, they almost always mispronounce the U as an So they say pasuk. But this is, it's not good. Pasuk. Pasuk. Pasewq. Pasuk. Mr. Robert, how do you say verse? And everybody listening, feel free to try to answer yourselves as well, even if we can't hear you. Have a pencil and paper next to you. These are common words that every Jew should know. Pasuk. Right? Pasuk literally means stopped. So a pasuk, a verse, is a stop in the verse. Well, it's kind of also like a cut. It's just like a It's a stop, right? So these are the stops within the text. You read a verse and then you stop. That's a pasuk. Between the stops is a pasuk. All right. How do you say chapter? Chapter in Hebrew. Right? Perek. Perek. P-E-R-E-Q. Perek. Accent symbol over the first E. Perek. Perek means a joint. Literally, it's a joint. So these are like the joints of the text of the book. Perek, chapter, literally means a joint. And so it's the same word for a wrist, perek. And the elbow, marpek. All right. Someone tell me next word. How do you say next word? Tegili, next word.
Milah haba'a.
Kol hakavod. All right. How do you say all? A-L-L, all.
Kol.
Kol.
Nachon, kol hakavod. How do you say respect, honor, glory, renown? These are all the same word in Hebrew. Respect, honor.
Baruch.
Baruch is more like an endowment of something, to attribute something to something. A blessing, praise. How do we say respect or renown? So that would be kavod, kavod. K-A-V-O-D, kavod. Accent on the O, kavod. So how do you say all the respects? Someone does something impressive or commendable. How do you say all the respect? The to you is implied, like much respect to you. Literally all the respect. How would you say that?
Kol hakavod.
That's it. Kol hakavod. Kol hakavod. So if you hear me or someone else say kol hakavod, they're literally saying like great. They're saying literally all the respect, but the connotation is like great job. All right, let's move into Hebrew for Purim. Oh, there we go. Look familiar?
Yep. Melech. Hamelech.
All right, make sure that when you read the chaf at the end of a word, you always pronounce it how?
Not hard like a K, but more guttural. Melech.
Soft. Correct.
Melech.
Always, unless you see one single dot, which is rare. So
That
9
hardens it.
times out of 10, it's going to be
Mhm.
that beautiful sound. Melech. Ha melech. All right, that is the king. Let's get someone else to read the next word. All right, you can sound out each syllable.
Hamalka.
Beautiful. That's right. Hamalka. Hamalka. Who can tell us this first part of the word? Ha. Is that a closed syllable or an open syllable?
Open.
All right. Why is it open? How do you know?
Because there's no consonant at the end.
Correct. It consists only of a consonant and a vowel. It's not closed with another consonant. Excellent. Who can tell us whether the second part of the word, mal, mal, is that a closed syllable or an open syllable?
Closed.
That's right. Why is it closed?
Because there is a consonant at the end.
All right, so it's closed because the vowel of this syllable is closed off from other syllables. It's sandwiched between two consonants. So this one syllable consists of a consonant, a vowel, and a consonant. Mal, hamal. All right. Malka means the queen. You see, it's just the feminine form of melech. Amalka. Now, normally when the letter kaf, this is the next to last letter. Kaf looks like a backward C. When the letter kaf has a dot in it, it makes a K sound like the letter C, as opposed to when it's the last letter of a word and does not have just a single dot, in which case it's a kaf. Now, another thing you can learn here and see here is that when kaf is the final letter of a syllable, it's almost always a ha sound. Almost always. You can just assume it. That means you can assume it even when you see a word without vowels. If it's at the end of a word, assume that it's a ha sound, unless you know otherwise. In contrast to when the letter kaf is the first letter in a syllable. If it's the first letter in a syllable, which would include if it's the first letter in a word, it's almost always, well, it's always, really, it's pretty much always, a K sound. So that means if you know this principle about the letter kaf, it makes it easier to read Hebrew even when you don't see the vowel symbols. How you guys like that?
You know, I was thinking that would be a good time to point out the final form, and you kind of went back over it. But for
Yeah, I
those
did
who
point it out, but I'll
maybe
point it out again.
maybe
Go
those who don't recognize that we were looking at the same letter drawn differently.
Right. When the letter kaf is anywhere except for at the end of a word, it will look like a backward C. When the letter kaf is the final letter of a word, it's always going to look like sort of a exaggerated staff or a weird elongated R backwards. All right, but they're the same letter. It's only the shape that changes. Okay, Mr. Victor, if you're reading a Hebrew text and there are no vowels and you see that kaf is the first letter in the word, should it be assumed to pronounce as a K or as a ka sound?
If it's the first letter,
Yes.
not the first letter of a syllable, you mean the first letter of a word.
Well, if it's the first letter of a word, it is the first letter of a syllable as well, but it's true for both.
I would say it's going to be hard.
Right, and by that you mean a K, like a regular K
Yes.
sound in English. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So these are little tips, not just tips, they're principles of Hebrew phonology, the way you pronounce Hebrew, that once you learn them, then being able to read Hebrew without the vowels starts to become easier.
That makes sense. You know, you think about how in the world can you possibly pick up a Hebrew magazine or a newspaper, which has no vowel points almost exclusively, and understand it. But what you just explained really does, once you pick those up, I think it
Right.
really
So a
helps.
chaf at the end of a word, 9 times out of 10 is a ka sound, which means when in doubt, pronounce a kaf at the end of a word as a ka sound. And in contrast, when it's the first letter in a word, K like the word kite, right? And this is not only true with this letter. There's a ton of different patterns like this, that as you learn them, then it's really not that mysterious how you would read a word without the vowels. It's just a matter of becoming familiar. You guys feel free to interrupt at any time if you have any questions. So how do we say continue in Hebrew? Continue. If you're speaking to several people, you would say Bo'u Nam Shi. Come again?
Let me mute. Okay. Had a microphone that was unmuted.
Does someone want to suggest how you say continue if speaking to a group?
Bo nam shi.
All right. B-O apostrophe E-W, B-U,
Bo.
or B-O apostrophe U, B-U, space, N as in never, A, M as in mother, S-H, E-E, K, with a line under the K to let you know it's a sound. Bu nam shi. That's if you're telling several people that we should continue. Literally, it means come, we shall continue. Bu nam shi. That's how you say, let's continue. So everybody, let's say together, Bu nam shi.
Bo nam shi.
Beautiful. All right, mi haba. Who is next? Mi haba. These are
Mel-
words related to the book of Esther and Purim, the holiday of Purim. Purim. Go ahead.
Melachut.
Odpam again.
Melachut. Melachut.
Malchut. That's right, Malchut. All right, Malchut. And what does it mean?
Kingship.
Yofi. Excellent. Beautiful. Malchut. So you can see the connection. You see how Hebrew works. It builds off root letters. So the MLK sound, Mem Lamed Chaf, MLK sound. It's in the word for king, in the word for queen, in the word for kingdom or dominion. Right? And Hebrew works like this for all sorts of different concepts. Whereas in English, you don't see any connection in the word root of the word between queen and king. They look completely different. But in Hebrew, you have this MLK root in both forms, even in the word for a dominion or a kingdom. All right, someone tell me next word. How do you say next word?
I've got a question. Is this an exception of the rule we just learned about cough then?
Can you elaborate?
Because I'm waiting for the screen to appear. The cough is the guttural sound rather than the hard K, and isn't at the beginning of the syllable?
Yes, that you're right. It's an exception. That's right. But I want you guys to try to stop referring to chaf as a guttural letter. I know people frequently call it a guttural letter, but it's not good to do so for Hebrew for very practical reasons. Because when you're learning about how vowel sounds change specifically with guttural letters, that does not apply to the letter chaf. Right? So for our intents and purposes, guttural refers to sounds that are made beyond the cavity of the mouth. So beyond the uvula, which is a little thing that dangles from the roof of your mouth. If you open up your mouth and look in a mirror, you'll see a little dangling piece of flesh. Guttural letters, for our intents and purposes, with regard to Hebrew or Semitic languages in general, are sounds that are produced further into the throat beyond the uvula. If it is a sound that is produced anywhere from the uvula to your lips, that is not guttural. And chaf falls in that range. Chaf is produced in the main cavity of your mouth, between your lips and
when you say beyond, I think of the air coming out and coming beyond the uvula, but you're talking
this area,
about before it or in the throat.
In the throat. Right? Right. And this isn't just being nitpicky, it has practical implications for how you read Hebrew, how the vowels are pronounced in relation to guttural letters. And with regard to this, chaf is not treated as a guttural letter. And it's not a guttural letter, but colloquially it may be, because it sounds kind of closer to the throat. But if you think about how you're producing it, think about what is touching what in your mouth when you make a ch sound, then you can understand that it's not in your throat. It's still in the main cavity of your mouth. Can someone tell us what is touching what? What is contacting in your mouth when you produce the sound of kha? So it's
Is it the
Like the
back
back
of
of
the
the tongue?
tongue
touching
touching the
what?
roof of your mouth?
That's right. It's the back of your tongue touching the roof of your mouth. And what part of the roof? Well, the roof of your mouth. That means it's between the lips and the uvula, right? If it were in your throat, you wouldn't say roof of your mouth.
Very close, though. Very close.
It's
In other words,
close.
I could see it taking time to develop that for someone who's never had
Oh,
to.
definitely. Definitely. It took me like a week to to learn how to do that. Come on, I was a teenager. No one was there helping me.
That's
We
true.
didn't have the Mishnah wall.
You were slightly immersed at the time, or you just picked it up really easily.
I was in backwoods Louisiana.
Yeah, you were back there with the gators, all guttural. And
Oh,
uh,
all right, let's keep going.
that's awesome.
Mi haba, who's next? Mi
Ani
haba,
haba'a,
kol hakavod.
malchuso,
All right, one more time. Say it slowly and more loudly, please.
malchuso.
All right, so I don't know if it's the audio quality on my end or your microphone, but I can't really hear you pronouncing the chaf. It sounds almost like an H.
Malchuso.
There you go.
Me.
That's definitely it. That's definitely it. And sometimes you might be pronouncing it correctly. I just can't hear it, the
Right.
nuance with low microphone quality. All right.
Yeah, I've got it set to cut out a bunch of background noise, so
That's
it could
probably
be.
why. I've noticed that before. When you remove the background noise on your mic, it will often distort the kha sound, makes it much less noticeable. All right, malchutha, beautiful. And what does it mean?
His kingdom.
All right, and again, we can see the root for king, melech, the MLK. Who can tell us what this O is at the end? Right? For the word kingdom is malchuth. Here we've added an O at the end. Malchuth, malchutho.
His,
Malchuth, kingdom, malchutho. Come again?
his,
That's right. So the way you say his in Hebrew, you add an O at the end of the noun. So whereas in English, we put the pronoun, the possessive pronoun, before the noun which is possessed, before the noun which is owned, in Hebrew, you do the opposite. You will say the noun and then the pronoun suffix, which makes it his. And so this is just one of the things that makes learning Semitic languages more challenging. The syntax, the way you structure sentences is very different from English. In English, you say his kingdom. In Hebrew, you're literally saying kingdom his. All right. Someone tell me next word. Mishu, תגיד לי מילה הבאה. תגיד לי מילה הבאה.
Milah haba'a.
כל הכבוד. All right. Mi haba. Who is next? Mi means who. Mi haba. You want to be next? Say ani haba or ani haba'a.
Ani haba.
כל הכבוד. All right. Tikra. Read. Tikra. This is the word for gifts. Right, on Purim, we have a duty to give gifts. Ech omrim. How do you say ech omrim gifts? Ech omrim gifts. Victor, maybe your mic is muted. I don't know.
No, I actually am trying to figure out how to matanot, matanut. I'm lost
Wait, that's
here.
it. You can be confident. This vav with a dot over it makes an O sound. O, O.
Matanot.
You got it. Just like it did here. Malchuto. O, O at the end. Malchuto. Matanot. Matanot. is gifts. Matanot. And you can see here the root of the name Matthew. Mat. Matit. Matit is a type of gift. Matityahu, the gift of God. Matanot, gifts. Mila haba'a. Mi haba. Mi haba. Mi haba.
Ani haba.
Kol hakavod.
Ani yim.
Beautiful. Very good. Aniyim. Aniyim. How did you know that you should pronounce one of these yuds as a Y sound, as a consonant Y? How did you know that? A lot of people don't do that.
Well, I see the vowel point underneath.
That's right. If you see a vowel point under a yud, under the letter yud in Hebrew, then you can know for certain, you can know with certainty, it should be pronounced like a consonant Y and then the vowel underneath it. Aniyim and not anim. A lot of people would read this aniyim, but it's aniyim with a Y sound. Excellent. So aniyim are poor people. One of the key elements of celebrating Purim is that we give matanot to aniyim. We give matanot to poor people. All right, let us know what we should do next.
Can I ask, ani yim, is that not just the word for people? Where's the poor?
So the word means poor, and people is part of the definition of that word, right? And the regular word for people is, well, there's a few. One would be anashim, which literally means males, male people, but it's usually used for people in general. Aniyim is specifically poor people. And Hebrew is a lot more concise than most Indo-European languages, much more concise. So if you look at a Hebrew book and you hold it next to a translation of the same book, the Hebrew book will look like this, and the translation will look like this. It's a very noticeable. All right. Aniyim, poor people. Or if you want to understand it maybe a little differently and not be confused by the word people, you could translate it as poor ones, or just poor as in the sentence, you should help the poor. When you say poor in a word like help the poor, you mean poor people. So people is inferred, it's inherent in the word poor, in that particular word.
The giving gifts, as you're referring to, it seems to be that like everyone's giving gifts to everyone. So
yeah, it's a
like-
problem. It's a problem.
okay, I didn't know if it was a problem or just a remembrance, but I think if everyone's blessed, then good. But you're saying they need to focus more on trying to help people.
We do need to focus more on trying to help the poor people. Whereas usually people give a little bit to most people who are celebrating Purim, if they're Torah observant and they know the halachot, they are usually careful to give something to the poor. But still the tendency is that they'll give a whole lot more to their friends, a whole lot more to their friends who are not poor. And that is a problem. We are supposed to give something to our friends, but that is distinct from the giving to the poor, and both are obligations. The giving to one's friends are cooked dishes, something cooked specifically to eat, whereas the gifts to the poor could be anything that would help the poor. And we're obligated to give to at least 2 poor people. You're not obligated to give to that many friends gifts. But usually what happens is people will give just the required amount to the poor and as cheap as they could do it. And then they'll spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars to give to like 7 or 8 different friends or even more.
Oh, I was not aware of it being like that.
I'm exaggerating, but that's more or less how it is. And it makes sense because that's just the tendency of people. We want to show our love for our friends, and usually when we give to the poor, we don't really know who the person is, but still we should give more to the poor, and our friends should be understanding and probably would be understanding that we should care about the poor.
Yeah,
right.
and I would think that the friends should also not be looking for the gift. In other words, not assuming that you're not
I don't
doing
think that
your
they
part of the
usually are.
command. Yeah, yeah,
But
exactly. But I mean, it's in other words, if we're giving to the poor and not to our friends, you're pleasing Hashem, I believe, and the friend shouldn't say, "Well, I didn't get anything, so he's not being
right,
obedient."
right. Although both are a duty on Purim.
Okay.
We are supposed to give cooked dishes to a friend, specifically cooked dishes. But Purim is not a Jewish Christmas. That's kind of what Purim and Hanukkah have been turned into, is like a Jewish Christmas. That's not what it is. we we actually have duties. It's not just a free for all, do whatever you feel like. Eh.
All right.
All right. Milah haba'a. Mi haba batur. Who's next? Mi haba batur in line. Mi haba batur. Heather.
Matanot la'alniyim.
Beautiful. Matanoth. Matanoth la'aniyim. Matanoth la'aniyim. All right. What does it mean?
Gifts for the poor.
Nachon. That's right. Nachon. Everybody write down the word. Nachon means established, but it's used for correct. So if you want to say correct in Hebrew, you say that's established. Nachon. That's correct. N-A-K-O-N. N-A-K-O-N. Accent symbol over the O. Nachon. You want to put a line under the K. Nachon. Put a line under the K so you know it's a K and not a K. Nachon. So matanot lo aniyim. Where do we see the word for here? Where is for in the Hebrew?
It's the law.
Nachon. That's right. Nachon. All right. You want to be haba? You want to be the next?
The I can be, but I guess the law is actually the contraction of the le and the ha.
It's the same. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. It's a contraction of the le and then ha. There would be a ha here. Well, we don't have it here, but there would be a ha. And because the lamed, which means for, sort of swallowed the ha, then the fact that it swallowed it is kind of represented with the ah vowel. So la is like a contracted form of laha. Very good. Milah haba'a. Tur shalcha, your turn. Tur shalcha, your turn.
Uh, Mishalo, Mishalok. No, Mishalah.
So
Mishloha.
remember how a moment ago we discussed that it's important to understand, for the purposes of Hebrew, to understand that chaf is not a guttural letter,
Right.
right? So this is a perfect example of why that's important, and we'll get to it. But for
Is it
now,
ak?
mishloach, mishloach,
Mishloach. Yeah.
mishloach. All right. Milah haba'a, next word. Milah haba'a.
Mishloach manot.
Good. Mishloach manoth. Mishloach manoth. All right. So why is it important to know that chaf, the letter chaf, is not the same as a guttural letter? I'll show people chaf again. Let's see. So for review, this is the letter chaf right here. Looks like a backwards C. Chaf is often referred to as a guttural letter, but when discussing Hebrew grammar, we should not call it that. Why? So if a guttural letter is the final letter in a word in Hebrew, and this is only with regard to guttural letters, then if there's a vowel under it, you pronounce the vowel first and then the consonant sound of the guttural letter. So if you have a guttural letter that's the final letter in a word, and there's a vowel under it, you pronounce the vowel and then the letter, as opposed to doing what we normally do in Hebrew, which is read the letter and then the vowel. You guys follow? Make sense?
Yes.
Can.
So for example, if we had this letter tav here, if we had it in place of the letter het, and then we had this vowel under it, you would read it as ta, ta. Because tav is not a guttural letter. But because we have a het here, and het is guttural, then we know that the vowel should be pronounced first and then the guttural letter, not followed by a vowel. Simply vowel, guttural letter. Ah, and not ha. So mishloach and not mishlocha. If this were a chaf, you would say mishlocha. But because it's not a chaf, rather it's a guttural letter, it's mishloach, mishloach. If chaf were guttural, it would have the same rule applied to it, but it's not applied to it. And that's one of the ways we know that the pronunciation of the letter het historically is distinct from the sound of the letter chaf, because it's treated differently. It's treated as a guttural letter, and chaf is not. So that means they're supposed to be coming from two different places in the person's head. All right, mishloach manot. Who can tell us what mishloach manot is? What is mishloach manot?
Send portions.
That's right, specifically of prepared food, cooked food. So mishloach is from the word shalach, means sent. Mishlach is sent. Like the apostles, if you recall, Messianics often call the apostles shlichim. It's the same root word, those who are sent out. And believe it or not, Chabad, Lubavitch, emissaries that they send throughout the world, they also call them shlichim. It's the same word, same word. They don't call them apostles because they don't want to sound Christian, but it's the same exact Hebrew word. Manot, a mana is a portion of food, like a dish or a course. So if you have a 3-course dinner, then you have a dinner of 3 manot. So a mana is a portion of food. And this is the mishloach manot is one of the key elements of observing Purim, of celebrating Purim, that we send portions of food, right, to friends. Bo'u namshich. Who can tell us, what does bo'u namshich mean? Bo'u namshich.
Let's
Bo'u.
continue.
That's right. Tagidi od pa'am. Say it again. Tagidi od pa'am. Say it again.
Tagid bo'u namshich.
Beautiful. Look at that. You're making entire sentences. Tagidi or tagidu means say, and then bo'u namshich means let's continue. So if you want me to continue, you can tell me bo'u namshich. I'll be waiting.
Bo'u namshich.
Yofi. Yofi means beautiful in the sense of like great. All right. Mi haba. Who's next? Mi haba. Mish. Mishte. Mila haba'a hi mishte. So mishte is a drinking party, basically. It literally means drink. A drink is a mishte. So in the book of Esther, the party is called a mishte. It's from the word shote, which means to drink. So that's a festive party, and it entails drinking of wine. I suppose it could be other alcoholic beverages as well.
In this case, is the mem a prefix?
It is not. In this case, it is part of the word. I don't think it's part of the root word, but it is part of the word. It makes it a noun. Normally, you can assume that a mem at the beginning is a prefix. So that's a good assumption to make if you don't know for sure. So mem is frequently a prefix attached to words, which would mean from or than, T-H-A-N, from or than. But it's also often added to a root to turn the root into a noun. So the root is shata or shate, which has to do with drinking. Right? Mishte. Mila haba'a. Mi haba. Who's next? Mi haba.
I know that word.
Yeah.
Mesiba. It's a birthday party, I think.
So it's any kind of party. In modern
Any
Hebrew,
party, okay.
yeah. In modern Hebrew, they use it for any sort of party. Any sort of party. And you want to read it for us again one more time?
Mesiba.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right. And what does it literally mean?
Party.
What is it?
Reclining to feast, it says here.
Yeah, so literally, misiba is from the word to recline. To recline. And who can tell us why? Why would that be? And it still means literally recline, even in modern Hebrew. But the way people use it, the connotation is a party. Who can tell us why would this mean reclining? Have any of you guys seen ancient or old paintings, sometimes ancient paintings of nobility or dignitaries, and they're like on a couch and there's someone with draping grapes over their mouth? That's why it's called reclining, because parties during especially during the Greek period, the Greek occupation of the land of Israel, parties began to be associated with reclining and creating an atmosphere of being laid back and really like that's the way you celebrated, to be like on par with the Greek elites. That's why we
Kind
say
of a
masiba.
royalty and
Yep.
not
the same
having any
reason-
cares or worries.
Correct. Correct. So that's the same reason that we lean during Passover, during the reading of the Haggadah on Passover. Same exact reason. And that's the literal meaning for party in Hebrew. All right, Mr. Victor, tell us next word.
Different page. Hold on.
I see we are on a different page, aren't we?
Yeah.
All right.
Mila.
Milah ha
Haba'a.
nachon. Milah haba'a. Milah haba'a. Mi rotze likro. Who wants to read? Mi rotze likro. Mi rotze likro. Who wants to read? Mi haba. Who's next? Mi haba. If you want to be next, I want you to say ani rotze. I want. Ani rotze likro. Ani rotze likro. I want to read. Ani rotze likro. I'm going to have to call someone out. Dan and Martina, one of you guys want to help us out? Heather? Wow, you guys are quiet.
There's
Go ahead.
Heri off ha migila.
All right, good. Qari'ath hammarillah. Qari'ath hammarillah. How do you know that you would read this first word as qari'ath and not kriyat? How do you know it's kriyat and not kriyat? How do you know there's a break in the sound? Qari'ah instead of qari?
Yeah,
instead of
The
kriya.
Yud?
I parked in the street.
All right, so anytime you have an aleph with a vowel, it tells us that the aleph should be pronounced as a consonant. Aleph should be pronounced as a consonant anytime it has a vowel. What is the consonant sound of the letter aleph?
Glottal stop.
That's right. Who can give us an example of a glottal stop? Because we have it in English. We have the sound in English, but we don't have a letter to represent it specifically. But we use it every day, all the time. What's an example of a glottal stop, the sound of aleph in English?
Oh,
So, yes, the sound. It's like a little click in your throat. Anytime a native English speaker reads a word that ends with the letter T, 9 times out of 10, they're going to pronounce the T at the end of a word, not as a T. Native English speakers don't usually go around saying, I want it. I want it. What we usually do is we pronounce the T not as a T, but as a glottal stop. And we're just never taught that that's the technical word for it. So native English speakers do not usually say, I want it. We say, I want it. I want it. I want it. I want it. Not I want it, but I want it. That is the sound of glottal stop. So if you have a aleph in Hebrew, you have an aleph with a vowel. That aleph sound will be that same sound like we do in English, like it, qari'at, 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 qari'at hammerillah. All right, what does qari'at hammerillah mean?
reading of the scroll.
Nachon. That's right, nachon. All right, Heather, one more challenge for you. Where do we see a schwa in these words? What is a schwa? Where is it?
There's two, one under the kuf and one under the mem.
Good. So there's one here under the kuf, right here, and there's one under the mem, right here. And how many types of schwa are there in Hebrew? Well, main types, let's say. How many main types?
Two.
That's right. What are they? Don't worry about a
Sound,
specific name, just explain it. Go ahead.
sounded and unsounded.
Right, that's right. So when it is sounded, what does that mean?
It makes the short S sound.
That's right. So instead of making an it'll just be very short. So for example, here we have a shava, the first letter of this word, qari'at. So that means, as opposed to reading it like qari'at, qari'at, you would do the opposite. Instead of accenting the first syllable, qari'at, you're under accenting qari, qari. It's very short, qari'at. Okay, how can we know? And there's several ways. So just give me 2 ways, because we are looking at 2 ways here. 2 ways to know whether the shava should be sounded or silent. How do we know that it should be pronounced as a sounded shava? How can we know? The 2 ways that we're looking at right here.
One's the beginning and one is in the middle. So it's at the beginning, you're going to sound it. In the middle, you're not going to sound it.
All right, very good. So when it's at the beginning of a word, it is always sounded. That's right. If it's in the middle of a word, let me put it this way. If you're reading an unvowelized text, but you happen to know that there was a shava somewhere, or even if you're looking at vowelized words, if it's in the middle of a word, if you don't know any better, if you don't know how to distinguish between sounded and silent, to recognize it, then assume it is silent. Assume that any shava that you see anywhere in Hebrew, assume it's silent unless you know otherwise. And the reason for that is because of the many different mistakes people commonly make when they read Hebrew, including native modern Hebrew speakers. Of the most common mistakes they make with shava, they more commonly do not pronounce it when it should be. And that means that, go ahead.
Here, though, the thing is that the ha is added, okay, because it
Correct.
actually means the. I mean, so that schwa for Miguela should probably be pronounced because it's the word that we're talking is Miguela.
That's right. You're right. You're absolutely right. Now, I'm going to get back to what you're saying, and you hit it on the dot. Hit it on this. I don't know. Me English no speak. You hit it on the nail. But before we get to that, I want everybody to write down that when you're reading Hebrew, if you encounter a shava and you're unsure, that's an if, big if, you are unsure whether it should be silent or sounded, then pronounce it as if it is silent. The reason is because that is the way that most speakers of Hebrew and readers of Hebrew will do it. Even if they're making a mistake, that is the mistake they're most commonly going to make. And that means that if we, as a Hebrew learner, make a mistake, if we make a mistake, we want it to be a mistake that even native speakers would make. So it's like in English, if you're learning English as a second language, let's say the word wanna for want to, I wanna, and I chana. Both are mistakes. But if you're going to make a mistake in English, you want it to be a mistake that is widely made, that's widely understood, right? So it's better to say wanna or whatcha, like what you doing, meaning what are you doing? What are you doing? It's better to say whatcha than cutcha. If you say cutcha, nobody understands. It'll like stick out like a sore thumb in the middle of your English. But if you say what you doing, although it's not technically correct, but it's something everybody does. So it's more socially acceptable. Same thing with schwa. If you're unsure, then make it silent because that's a socially accepted mistake. Whereas to sound a shava where it should be silent, that is not a widely accepted mistake. It's just not done by speakers of Hebrew. Now, back to what was it, Dan or Robert who was speaking, who explained this? Why it should be sounded.
Dan.
Okay, Mr. Dan, how you doing?
I'm good. Manishma.
Baruch Hashem, kol hakavod, gever. All right. So he correctly pointed out because the ha definite article, the, is being added to the word Megillah, then it should be sounded shava. And you're right. But let's say someone didn't know this word Megillah. You could still know that it should be sounded. How? Because there's a dot in the letter that's over the shava. So anytime you see a shava anywhere in the Hebrew language, if you see the letter, the symbol shava, if you see that the letter above it has a dot in it, that tells you with certainty you should pronounce this shava as a sounded shava. As I mentioned, though, the mainstream practice is to still make it silent, but that's a mistake. It's a widespread mistake, and there are many widespread mistakes. The reading of the scroll of Esther. Merila really just means scroll, but we often just call the book of Esther the scroll. All right, any questions up to this point? We've been going on for a while. We're looking at words and phrases that are associated with Purim, with the book of Esther. Any questions up to this point? I see Victor's hidden himself away.
Multitasking. No questions here, and I don't see any in the chat.
All right. Bo'anam Sheikh, we only have a few more. Mi rotze likro, who wants to read? Mi rotze likro. If you want to read, please say Ani rotze likro. Ani rotze likro. If you're a woman, rotza.
Ani רוצה לקרות.
Kol hakavod. Likro.
Nikro.
There you go. Likrot is also a word, but that means to occur. So,
Okay.
Ani rotza likro. Beautiful. Bachavod. Go right ahead. Bachavod.
Yehudi.
All right, Yehudi.
Yehudi.
Got it. right? Accent on that last syllable, Yehudi. Can you tell us about this word, Yehudi? Tell us whatever you know. Everything. It's a loaded word.
Is it also from Yehuda?
It is. It is. Yehuda is Judah, and Yehudi is Jew. So they are absolutely, indisputably related words. A Yehudi is one who is associated with Yehuda, historically speaking. Anything else you want to add, or anyone else wants to add to this word?
Are we looking at the Yud and the Hey here as far as that's concerned, as far as being letters from, Adonai?
So I'm opening the floor for you guys to make any comments about this word. There's a lot that can be said. So if you want to touch on that, you can go ahead.
Well, I mean, again, I get there. I'm just making an observation. I'm just trying to think of what you're looking for.
I'm not looking for anything specific.
Okay.
I just because there's a lot to the history of this word, so whatever anyone wants to contribute. All right, so as you pointed out, and it would be glaring, not just like they could notice it, but it's glaring to anyone who knows Hebrew, to anyone familiar with the Bible, that the first three letters of the word for Jew are the same letters in the name of the God of Israel, the incomparable one, the source of all existence. Right? So etymologically, technically, it's not directly related to the four-letter name of God. It is kind of indirectly, but not directly. However, in the written form, it's explicitly and overtly what's the term? Reminiscent of the four-letter name of God, and it is in fact glaring. So that a Yehudi is one who's associated with the God of Israel, the true God. Right? Now, more technically, the etymology, the origin of the word, is in reference to how the mother of Judah proclaimed when she gave birth to her son, she proclaimed that he will be called Yehudah because she was grateful. She gave praise to God because she was grateful. So this is the same root as the word todah, which means to give thanks. Todah, or the word thanksgiving, hodaya, hodaya. So this word has to do with gratitude, thankfulness, acknowledgement. The same root word is used for to confess. So one who professes the true God is Yehudi. That's what it says in the Talmud. All who profess the true God, who eschew, who denounce idolatry, is a Jew. In some sense of the word, they're a Jew. So Yehudi literally means one. Literally, it's he shall be praised, referring to God. He shall be praised. Yehudi. So in many ways of approaching this word, it refers back to the God of Israel in many ways. So that's in contrast to the word Muslim, which they love to push into people's faces. We're the true religion because Muslim means submit, and we submit to the true God, right? And Muslim does mean to submit, but you don't have in the word Muslim who they're submitting to, right? It's not in the word. And they're like, Jesus was a Muslim. Jesus was a Muslim. I can't do accents. I'm terrible at accents. Moses was a Muslim, right? Everybody was a Muslim, everyone, right? You could say they were a Muslim and that they submitted to the will of God, but they certainly were not submitting to a 7th century mockery of the religion of peace, right? So in the same vein, if we're looking at the literal meaning of the word Yehudi, then even before the tribe of Judah existed, the prophets of the children of Israel were also Jews. If we're looking at it literally, if we play the same game, we could say that anyone who truly worships the God of Israel and doesn't mock his name, doesn't deny his teachings through the prophets of Israel, he's a Yehudi in some sense of the word, even if it's not legally the case. Right? We could say that Abraham was a Yehudi, even though he wasn't born to Jewish parents. in the literal meaning of the word. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that you're starting to touch on a topic. A lot of people complain that no, they're Israelites. They're Israel, not Jews. You know, Jews is only
Right.
one of the 12 tribes, and
Correct.
they use
You're
it in a
right.
negative sense.
So, as I mentioned in a video I uploaded this Erev Shabbat, this last Sabbath Eve, regarding connotations, people who are not careful to distinguish between different connotations of a word really should not be taken too seriously when they talk about a topic as if they're an expert. If a person, and that's not to say that a person can't make a mistake. A person can be fairly expert in something and still make an inadvertent error. But a person who's not able to recognize that words have different connotations in different contexts really should not be given the light of day for speaking on a particular topic. Yeah, I'm not saying they shouldn't have a right to speak. Let them speak. But if you have any common sense, you shouldn't give them your time of day if you notice that they can't distinguish between different usages of a word. Every language has this. This is not something that I'm just pulling up with regard to the word Jew because it's convenient. Can you give me some examples of some words in English? Give us
Well,
some words in English that have more than one use. Same word.
I was distracted, but it seems like that is definitely the way to respond is to show how there are examples in their own language
Tons.
where they do the same thing, but none are
Tons of
jumping in my head.
examples.
So like, what do you got?
Do any of our members here have any examples in English? Words that are homonyms or that have significantly different connotations in different contexts, can be used in different ways in different contexts while remaining the same word. Oh my gosh, guys, this is
Maybe
okay.
key, the key. Are you looking for a word?
That's
Sorry.
right. You're talking about an English word? Because there's also
Yeah.
a Hebrew word.
Oh, you want the Hebrew word? Okay.
No. I want an
Oh.
English word. But this is true for the word key, whether you're speaking of the English word key or a Hebrew word key. It's true. So that's a great example. Can you explain?
Well, I was thinking about the key opening the door.
That's
And
right. So that's
key
one
for
usage, one connotation. The
the
second.
can be musical, the key.
That's right, exactly. Or the key to life.
To
When you say
yes,
the key to life is to always be willing to adjust your perspective as necessary to find the most positive path in life, right? In that case, when you say the key to life, you're not talking about a literal key, right? You're talking about a uh, a significant impacting principle on how you live, right? As opposed to a physical key. Right? A person would be a fool to think that when you say the key to life is XYZ, they're talking about a literal physical key that goes into a door. And likewise, you said a key can also be a certain note referred as differences in tones in music, right? So the same thing with,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I'm not really seeing that helping me here as a something to retort back. In other words, it's not discussing or establishing a person's status or
Well,
nationality.
at
So I'm
first, I'm
looking
just
for a
referring
better
to a
example.
word. At first, I'm just wanting people to recognize that there are words in every language,
Sure.
words that have different connotations, meaning different ways that the same word is used. And that is the case with the word Jew also. And so this is whether or not there's an exact parallel. There will not always be exact parallels, but we can use an example in English, the term American. In some contexts, American means specifically a citizen of the United States, right? And people who are from other parts of North America or North and South America, they may be like, well, I'm American too. Yeah. In a different context, if you're talking about geographically, you're also American geographically because you live in North or South America, but you are not American in the sense of a citizen of the United States. You are not American in the sense that you are not a citizen of a country where the term America is part of the official name of your country, right? So the term American can refer to a citizen of the US, It can refer to anything uniquely associated with the United States. And it can also refer to a person who is a resident or a citizen of any of the countries of North or South America. And to use any of these three different connotations of the word haphazardly, interchangeably, is to be irrational. It's mistaken. They are not interchangeable usages of the word. They're distinct usages of the word, and they're all the same word. Same with the term Yehudi.
All right. So I see American correlating with the word Israelite, not Georgian or
correct.
In other words, you can't say all Americans are Georgian or
Correct.
Louisianans or whatever you want to say. But it's almost like that's what's happening in the Hebrew is that what they're saying is that, well, you're saying that all the people who live in America are Georgians when they're not, and they're when they're talking about Jews and Israel.
So in some contexts, and the way you determine this is one by context. But how do you determine context? One, by looking at the time period that the text was written in, right? So if we're talking about literature of the Bible that's written before the split of the north and southern kingdoms of Israel, you have the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. They split under the sons of King Solomon, son of David. If we're talking about an era before that era, then generally the term Jew refers specifically to one of the tribe of Judah or somebody dwelling in that area, even if they're not of the tribe of Judah. But after that era, then the term Jew suddenly becomes frequently used in reference to any Israelite who has maintained his identity as an Israelite. The reason for that is because the northern kingdom was essentially destroyed by the Assyrians. Forgive me if I'm mistaken. I'm pretty sure that was the Assyrians. And they lost their identity. So many of them were exiled to Assyria. That's where you get the whole idea of the 10 lost tribes. And those of the 10 tribes who maintained their identity were those that aligned themselves with the southern kingdom, which was called the Kingdom of Judah. So from that point on, anyone who was associated with the people of Israel who maintained their identity as an Israelite, they were called Jews because from that point on, they were associated with the Kingdom of Judah. And we find this in Purim, in the book of Esther, where Mordechai, who's referred to as a Benjaminite, he's a member of the tribe of Benjamin, and yet he's called a Jew.
By Haman.
So,
ooh.
Yes, yeah. So it depends on the chronological context, right? Now, over time, we started adding, well, we didn't exactly add, because the literal meaning of the word Jew already existed, that it means, may he be praised, referring to God. May God be praised. Yehudah means, may he be praised. So this was always true from the beginning. However, we kind of emphasized the more literal meaning of the word as time went on, because after the destruction of the northern tribes, or the northern kingdom of those tribes, then the term Jew started being used interchangeably with Israelite, but especially with more of a religious connotation than even the term Israelite had. It started denoting more the meaning of the word Jew, one who's faithful to God, one who proclaims God, one who declares God, right? That is a Yehudi. And we see that it was used in this way by looking at the Targumim, the ancient Aramaic translations of the Torah. In those translations, you can see Israelites being referred to as Yehudayeh, Jews, even before the separation of the north and southern kingdoms of Israel. So that's not like a modern innovation that it's used, Jew is used in reference to Israelites in general. It was already being used that way in ancient times, post the separation of the two kingdoms. Right?
Very good. Very good.
We only have a few more words. Yehudi. So it has different connotations depending on context. And again, who can tell us what it literally means?
may he be praised.
Right. So Yehuda is literally may he be praised, Yehuda. And Yehudi is one who is associated with Yehuda. So that is one who praises in contextually the true God. Milah haba'ah. You can see some connections between these words. Nodeh means we shall give praise, or we shall show gratitude, thankful acknowledgement. Nodeh. So the nun at the beginning makes it we shall. And the odeh is the same root in Yehuda and Yehudi. Nodeh. Who wants to be next? Mi haba. Next word, milah haba.
Ani haba'a.
Kol hakavod.
Raha meha.
Okay. Now tell us which syllable here should be under accented and why. How do you know?
The one with the shawa.
That's right. That's right. So, contrasted. How should you say it and how should you not say it? As an example.
Raha meha.
That's
Is how it
perfect.
should be said.
Yes, that was
It
perfect.
shouldn't be said Raha meha.
Yes, and you know that because there's a shawa. So the shawa always means under accented syllable. It should never be the accented syllable. Rahamecha, rahamecha. All right, and it means
Your compassion.
it's suyan. Excellent. Where do we see the word your here? Where is your in the Hebrew?
The rach at the end.
Yes, the cha. That's your masculine singular your. And then rahameh means compassions of. So in Hebrew, the word for compassion, it's always plural. It doesn't exist in a singular form. So rahameh means compassions of. Singular would be rahamim. Rahamim. That is your Hebrew vocabulary for the day. So before we move on, we open the floor to any topic, any questions about anything on your minds. Maybe Victor or Heather has something they want to speak about or ask about.
Is it only about the Hebrew or anything?
No, you can ask anything.
Yeah,
Unless Victor objects.
We had a question about the Torah portion, about the word about Jacob being embalmed.
Okay.
And it said also, I know it's against the Torah embalming, right? But then I'm thinking, then we were talking about the 40 days, and then you have the 30 days. The Shloshim is referred to the 30 days, we think, and then the 40 days, we don't know, is that the embalming? Is that something that's Egyptian? It's a little bit, and in the end, Joseph is embalmed too. So what is that?
Well,
is there embalming, or is it just a mixture of spices?
they were probably embalming them, most likely, but there is a degree of speculation there. We don't know for sure if it's not explicit in the text. And there's a lot that's not written in the text. There's not an explicit prohibition against embalming. However, there is a prohibition against worshiping the remains of an individual, idolizing the remains of an individual, not burying them. And it could be the same way that ancient Midrash, ancient Jewish commentaries on the Torah, explain that the reason God didn't reveal the location of Moses' burial is because he did not want, and he saw that God knew that if it would be known, then Moses would be turned into an idol and the location of his burial into a place of idolatry. It could be that Jacob did not want this to happen. He he foresaw, knowing the Egyptian culture, that if he would remain in Egypt, they would build a permanent monument to him and perhaps turn him into a focus of idolatry, create a cult around him, which, Egypt was famous for doing these sorts of things. And so instead he wanted that he wouldn't be formally interred, wouldn't be formally buried until he's brought back to the land of Israel. And that is actually, it's actually commented on by Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, one of my favorite major rabbis of the Ashkenazi Jewish tradition. If you could get your hands on his commentary to the Torah, that would be great. I think it's originally written in German. It's one of the best commentaries that's not originally written in Hebrew. So that means anyone who's quoting his commentary from Hebrew is actually not quoting from the original. So if you look at his commentary specifically on that passage, he connects Yaakov's desire that his remains not stay in Egypt. He connects it to foolish ideas of the Egyptian idolaters regarding, you guessed it, reincarnation. So this is one of the greatest leaders of the Ashkenazi Jewish tradition, Orthodox, speaking out and calling reincarnation a belief of the idolaters. And that is not my opinion personally. I don't hold that you're an idolater if you believe in idolatry. I don't hold that you're an idolater if you believe in reincarnation. But Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch is one of two very well-known and very highly esteemed leaders of the Jewish world who explicitly associated idolatry with beliefs of pagans, and specifically in that particular location, his commentary on that particular passage. The burial practices of ancient Israel were different from what they are today. They did not usually have access to soft earth where they could just bury someone like we do in most places in the Western world. So what they would do is they would excavate a large cavern, and they'd put little niches in the walls of the cavern, and they would inter the body, the corpse, in the cave to decompose. And so after about a year or so, if the flesh were completely wasted away and it was only bones, then they would collect the bones, put them in an urn, and then place the urn or the vase holding the ossuary. They would then place it in a little niche. So it was a lot more intimate and perhaps more painful. I mean, I don't know if I could deal with that with someone who I love, but yeah, burial practices were not always as they are currently. Good question.
Makes me think of there are tombs and resting places that there's a lot of worship going on.
Oh yeah,
in Israel.
Yeah, this is a huge violation of the Torah and of the guidance of our sages. Yeah, it's ridiculous, and it's even more astounding and audacious. And this is not high-handed, to be clear, by most of them. It's not high-handed sin, but it's still audacious, because not only do they do it, basically turning the burial places of saints into centers of idolatry, but they even call it a mitzvah. They call it a commandment. So it's pretty astounding. It's a big problem. Even on some Torah holidays, Torah commanded holidays, like Rosh Hashanah, some of these people say it's a commandment to leave the land of Israel in order to make pilgrimage to pray and beseech the dead Jewish saint at his cemetery. Now, aside from the fact that the Torah already prohibits beseeching the dead, even if you're not beseeching the dead, you're violating the Torah commandment to heed our sages, who taught that we make a special burial marker for those who have passed away of Israel. For the dead of Israel, you should have a little monument, a burial marker, what they call a nefesh. Nefesh doesn't only mean soul, it also means a burial marker. But they say for the uniquely righteous, you should not do so. Our sages taught that you should not make a monument to mark the location of the burial place of the uniquely righteous, but rather their righteous words and their righteous deeds should be their remembrance. We should not know where they're buried. Yeah, they shouldn't be buried just in some random place. They should be buried in a cemetery, but we shouldn't know exactly where they are, lest it be turned into a place of idolatry. And they also instructed that we should not needlessly turn aside to visit cemeteries. They didn't use the word needless. I added that. They taught that we shouldn't turn aside to go visit graves. Only in the specific circumstances where we are instructed to be in a cemetery should we be there. Of course, any practical reason, if there's a fire or some to maintain public safety, you can be there. But the way that it's done today, it's an explicit violation of God's word and of the guidance of our sages. Big problem. You can find that in the Laws of Mourning, chapter 4, fourth halacha, if I remember correctly. It might be 8:8, but I think it's 4:4. Yeah. Any other questions about any topic off the top of your head? Fitness questions, diet questions, astronomy questions.
I had another question that came up. On Shabbat, the meals we are having. Did we read about that you're supposed to have a dinner before Shabbat, that meal? Because we're always trying to do it maybe after Shabbat, but we have this meal
Okay.
at shul. We have breakfast, the meal at shul, and then we question, should we have a meal before Shabbat ends or after?
Okay, I see what you're. So there are two concepts here. There's the third meal held on Shabbat. That's called Se'udah Shlishith. Se'udah Shlishith. And that means third meal. Se'udah is a meal, a nice meal, a large meal. And Shlishith is third, feminine form. That would be held on Shabbat, toward the end of Shabbat, after you prayed Minha, the afternoon prayer. Then you have a popular light meal that's often held after Shabbat has officially ended, and that's usually called Melawet Malka. Melawet Malka, and in pop Hebrew, colloquial Hebrew, they call it Malava Malka. Malava Malka. Malava Malka means escorting the queen, and it's referring to not wanting to immediately let go of Shabbat, but to try to maintain a Shabbat atmosphere just as long as you can, even though Shabbat has left. Malave Melka is not explicitly required as a halacha in the source text, not as being called Malave Melka, but at least in the Mishnah Torah, I haven't looked into the Talmudic source, but at least in the Mishnah Torah, which is a fairly early halachic source predating the Shulchan Aruch and most later codes, he does talk about putting some nuts and like some food out to eat, but he doesn't use the term se'udah. He doesn't use the term like a big meal. So there's a basis for both. There's more of a basis for having a third meal on Shabbat itself. There's dispute among rabbinic scholars as to whether the third meal was technically required or not. And maybe it's mentioned just because it was the common practice. And if you have a common practice to eat at that time, which people do usually have a practice to eat around that time, that you make it special, just like the other two meals. So either way, it should be a special meal. Yeah, sorry, I can't give you a clear-cut question, but that's because it happens to be sort of a point of dispute among post-Talmudic rabbis. And what do we do when we have a doubt? What do we do when we have a doubt regarding rabbinic law?
Leniency.
Yeah, you should be lenient. Unless you've taken upon yourself voluntarily, taken upon yourself to go by a certain rabbi, and he says you should do it, then in that case you should. Not because the Torah demands it, but because you decided to systematize my Torah observance. I'm going to go by the rulings of Rabbi XYZ. And you're not absolutely required to do that. You can go by different rabbis for different areas of Jewish law. You can go by Rabbi X for kashrut and Rabbi Y for Jewish prayer, or you could go by just one of them for all these different things. Or you could learn the source text yourself under the guidance of a rabbi. Somebody has a question about head covering.
Possibly.
You got something against do-rags?
No, actually, I was wondering if you could explain, because it's more of a Middle Eastern custom or way of covering the head, but I noticed you're wearing one, and
Is it that obvious? Is it really
no,
that
no,
obvious?
it's not actually that obvious. I could just tell that you are. I've when you're praying, usually your head's down, and I can tell at that point. But you're not wearing your what would most would say is a traditional kippah. And I was wondering if you could, yeah. And I was wondering if you could explain it. Like my kippah's I could put razor blades right here to slash people who mess with me. But yeah, wonder if you could explain it a little bit since we're taking all
All right.
questions.
So the head covering. And Heather, how much time do we have left, would you say? We should be wrapping it up in about 10 minutes, would you say? Or
Yeah.
Victor, you said something and you were off. I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, just I was saying we need to end soon. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so with regard to head coverings, number one, we do not want to oser et ma shemutar, we don't want to forbid what is permitted, and we do not want to lahatir et ma she'asur, we don't want to permit what is forbidden. So we should always distinguish between different levels of obligation and observance. And not all observance is obligation, right? So we need to distinguish between explicit Torah commandments, the explicit commandments of God from the Torah. Those are the everlasting commandments of the Torah. Two, we need to distinguish between the explicit commandments of the Torah as opposed to the rabbinic interpretation, how we apply it, which has authority. God commanded us to keep the commandments in the way that the judges of Israel instruct us to keep them, right? Three, rabbinic legislation. So these are laws that our sages don't even claim are their interpretation of a specific text of the Torah, but rather it is a rabbinic injunction, a created concept by our sages in order to strengthen our faith or to give a framework for doing a certain commandment. But we acknowledge that they came up with that idea. It's not doing the commandment in a specific way that they came up with is not equal to the explicit commands of God. An example of that would be Havdalah, separating between Shabbat and the new week. To do this separation with words is understood as an explicit command of God from the 10 Commandments, actually. But that we do it with specific types of words in a specific style and framework, holding a cup of wine, that is rabbinic. We're obligated to do that, but it's not equal to the word of God, right? So that's 3. 4, local customs. When our sages taught that a practice depends on local custom, then that local custom has sort of a degree of rabbinic authority. And then just happenstance de facto customs. It's just what your neighborhood or your community typically does. And perhaps they voluntarily took it upon themselves to do it that way. So then it's obligatory in so much as maybe your community, your synagogue has that as their local protocol. But it doesn't have the status of national law, and that distinction should be made. With regard to a head covering, most synagogues, even most non-Orthodox synagogues, have a local protocol that you not enter unless your head is covered, at least for males. So let's skip that, because that is what most people are more familiar with, and they're not sufficiently familiar with the rabbinic law and the Torah law. So number one, there's no Torah commandment for regular Israelites to cover their head. None. Only the priests of Israel, when they're serving in the temple, are required to cover their heads. That's number one. Number two, with regard to rabbinic law, there is no rabbinic injunction that all Israelites, male or female, always be covering their head at all times. Right? That doesn't exist. You will not find it in the Mishnah or in the Talmud. You will find already in the Talmud customs of covering the head, but it's not given as a law that an Israelite male should always be covering his head. You can, and that's good, and that is now the mainstream practice among devout Jews, but it's not a requirement, not even by rabbinic law, not even by rabbinic law. And historically, Jewish males, even Torah observant Jewish males, frequently did not cover their head all over the Middle East. That was the norm even until about a century ago. All right, so there is rabbinic law regarding a male covering his head when he is praying, when he prays the Amidah specifically. That is all that the Mishneh Torah refers to, the Code of Jewish Law by Maimonides. Only when he is praying. Even if he's saying blessings or reading from the Torah, in the Mishneh Torah, there's no obligation to be covering his head. That doesn't mean it's not commendable or praiseworthy or proper. Sure, it's proper, for sure. So, from the Mishneh Torah of the Rambam, only if you're praying the Amidah doesn't regular Israelite need to cover his head. And that's whether he's male or female, by the way. And the mainstream practice is not to be careful with that when it's a woman. But the halakha makes no distinction, male or female. If you're praying the Amidah, cover your head, even if you're not married. If it is a Torah scholar, he should be covering his head, whether or not he's praying, if it's a Torah scholar. Now, if you get into the Shulchan Aruch, which everybody claims to go by, it also says that men and women, married or not married, should be covering their head. They don't really go by the Shulchan Aruch there. They are biased, they're sexist, and only apply it to men, even though the Talmud and the Mishnah don't require it for all Israelite males to always cover their head. But the Mishnah does require unmarried women to be covering their head, generally in a public space, and specifically in a shuk, in a marketplace. We just throw that out the window, but we're going to add extra stuff on the men, even the little boys, right? This is not good. So the standard protocol, which is sort of de facto Jewish law, that means it doesn't have authority, but in practice, it's what is the common expectation, is that all Israelite males cover their hair. I'm at least a little bit, right? I'm here stating that if you're going to be strict with that de facto practice, which is a good practice, until you turn it into an obligation. If you're going to be meticulous with that, you should be meticulous with unmarried women covering their heads as well, which even married women are usually not meticulous with that. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, what style of head covering? Well, the popular style that you're looking at here, regular type of kippah, I like these, but it has more cultural connotation. Yeah, more of a cultural connotation. Many people wear these even if they're not particularly observant, by the way, especially in Israel. It's just basically a symbolic way of saying I'm a Jew. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're a careful Torah observant individual. Many people who are not careful at all, who may even smoke cigarettes on Shabbat, lighting a lighter, may be wearing a kippah. I've seen it many times. What style of kippah? You can wear anything as long as it's not offensive or gross, as long as it's not shatnez, a mix of wool and linen. You can wear it as a head covering. Traditionally, the people of Israel did not wear these. They traditionally did not wear these. This was sort of innovated as a way that we can cover our head and blend in with non-Jewish society more discreetly. Although if you ask me, it's not any more discreet than a larger head covering. In fact, I think wearing this is even less discreet than a larger head covering because it's more nowadays, the broader population, it's more associated with Jews specifically than a larger head covering is. If you wear a larger head covering, they may think you maybe are a Muslim, or they may not think Muslim either, depending on the style. It could be larger and they think, oh, you're just wearing a big beanie. I don't know, you just think it's cool. So if you don't want to be a target, you might want to avoid wearing these. I'm not against wearing it, but I kind of am a little bit against wearing these publicly, to be honest. Not in synagogues. In synagogues, I'm not against it at all. But publicly, I'm a little bit against these for a few reasons. One, for safety, and feel free to disagree with me, but for safety, especially if you know that there's a high chance that there are people who really hate Jews. I don't just mean have a little bit of an opinion, but if you know there are people who truly hate Jews in your area, why put a target on your head? I think that's ridiculous, if not negligent. Maybe in an extended way, even a violation of the Torah, that we should carefully guard our souls. But that doesn't mean you have that issue in a synagogue. You know, if you're in a place where there's a ton of people wearing them and you're among them, if you're among them, you're already associated with them, so it makes no difference. So, yeah, historically, Jews did not wear these little things. They historically wore turbans. They wore turbans to the point that one of the morning blessings that we say, Birkot HaShachar, the morning blessings, it refers to wrapping your head covering. Try wrapping one of these. I don't know how you wrap that on your head. And according to the Mishneh Torah, the Code of Jewish Law by Maimonides, and according to the Shulchan Aruch, you're not supposed to say those morning blessings unless you actually do the action it's associated with. So if you're not putting on a turban that wraps, there is a place where you could say, maybe you shouldn't be saying that blessing. That's not the mainstream protocol. But if you want to be strict with barachot, and we know the mainstream is that they're always super cautious with not saying God's name in vain, then why aren't they cautious with that? You don't want to wear a turban outside, out and about. I don't blame you. I really don't blame you. But you could at least do it in your house so that you're actually saying the blessing in the way that our sages were talking about. The Rambam, when he brings this blessing, the morning blessings, blessed are you, O Lord, most worthy are you, O Lord, who crowns Israel with strength. He says, when you put on your sheet, he didn't say when you put on your little 3-inch by 3-inch bottle cap size kippah. He says when you put on your sheet, that's a large cloth. And we know how they put on the sheet. They draped it, and then they would either wrap it around, or they would drape it, and they would put a turban around that on top. That's the way it was. You know,
What do you call it? I'm thinking, I'm picturing like the Arabs who have
it's the same garment.
And they have they pull that little ring around it.
That's called a ghatra. That's called a ghatra.
Okay.
But that's the Arabic term. Ghatra is the Arabic. It's probably related to the Hebrew word atara, because the letter ayin, you know, it looks kind of like a Y. The letter ayin in Hebrew, in Arabic, is the same shape for the sound of Ghatra and atara would be spelled with the same shaped letter. The only difference is a little dot. So I think our sages were actually making a play on words with that very object. And I can't prove it. I've never heard anybody say it, but that's also, you know, taking into consideration that 99.9% of rabbis don't know a lick of Arabic other than maybe Yallah. But a ghatara is probably related to the Arabic word atara, which is like a crown type thing that goes around.
And that would have been more common in Middle Eastern classical Judaism. They would almost be indistinguishable from the dress of their Arab neighbors.
There's, insofar as, well, no, before Islam, we would have been very distinguishable. If anything, Muslims probably adopted their popularized clothing from Jews. Why do I say probably adopted? I'm not just speculating. Because in the Quran, Muhammad had to give a decree. Muhammad had to order, or whoever was speaking, I don't know if it was Muhammad, whoever is speaking in the text, it may have been Allah, I don't remember. But the text in the Quran commands Muslim men and women, well, of the women, it says that they should start covering their cleavage and their heads, which entails that they were not doing it if it needed to be said. And
one thing that,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Well, I was going to say, one thing that I think we've lost in Judaism, that the Arabs, they can do their prostration, and when this falls off.
It's total. Even if you have a clip,
oh yeah,
then when you bow over, then it doesn't fall off, but then it does this.
Yeah, right.
You know, these
and that doesn't exist when you're wearing a wrapped head covering. Yeah.
Correct. And so with prostration and prayer, that's with regard to a rabbinic halacha. It's tied to the Torah. The Torah talks about proper worship of God with prostration, but it's only a commandment in the Torah with regard to bikurim, bringing first fruits. But in rabbinic law, it does become a halacha. However, bikurim, the Torah commandment regarding prostration, is only once a year. There's something even more significant than that. which is a Torah commandment every day of the year for Jewish males, for Israelite males, and that's to wear tefillin. Ideally, we wear tefillin as much as we can throughout the day, not just when we pray. That's ideally, right? And it's not the common practice, but mainly for unideal reasons. You can get by with doing it, especially, excuse me, especially if you work from home or own your own business. And really, in the United States or any Western country that hypothetically protects freedom of religion, you could get away with it even if you work at any office setting. And so really, we're supposed to be wearing tefillin throughout the day as much as we can. And a larger garment helps hold it in place, right? If you just have the strap on your head with this tiny little thing in between, the straps can get loose. But a larger garment helps hold it down. And if you have an elastic thing like a do-rag, this is elastic, you can even cover up. You can even cover up the tefillin. So, for example, when you prostrate wearing tefillin, the head, the bite, they call it the bite, the main part of the head tefillin won't be moving around and falling off. And this isn't an innovation with like modern nylon. You better believe that they were covering it with a turban back in the day to protect the thing. Yeah, there's only an issue of hatzitza, of separation. The tefillin should not have a separation between the tefillin and your head, right? But that's only an issue of, I can't hear you, Victor.
Yeah, sorry. It shouldn't sit on top of the turban. It should, but the turban
Correct.
can hold it.
Correct. So it's only an issue of hatzitza or separation from the bottom of the tefillin to the scalp, but there's no issue of covering it, right? So
And that's why we see oftentimes there'll be a rabbi teaching and he'll be wearing his tefillin, and it's because he just hasn't taken them off after his morning and he's continuing what he's doing during the day. He may get in front of a video and start teaching.
yes,
He's wearing, he's not trying to be super, I'm better than you. He's just
Correct.
being obedient.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
It's a widespread misperception, and it's actually kind of, I don't like to say it, but it's sort of the effects of assimilation, even of the religious Jewish world. The same way that Sikhs, it's an Indian, monotheistic Indian group. They're known for wearing these massive turbans, and they're a huge population. Their population hasn't suffered because they're wearing these massive turbans. More people hate Jews than hate Sikhs. They're not being targeted for hatred because they're standing out. The same way that they are known for wearing these massive turbans, the Jewish people were supposed to be known for wearing tefillin. And yeah, I agree with a lot of people that, well, it's too cumbersome. The tefillin are just so big. They don't have to be that big. You can purchase relatively small tefillin. It's available. You can order online from Israel, small tefillin. And I've been wanting to do that for quite a while, but I just keep using my old ones, which really I need to either fix or repair. But yes, tefillin are supposed to be a staple part of Jewish garb, much more than wearing a black and white outfit. Right? God didn't command that this would be the ut, the sign of Israel. He commanded tzitzit and tefillin. And of those two, tefillin and tzitzit, of those two, only one of them is Israelite male proactively commanded to pursue. Tzitzit, you're not violating a commandment by not putting on tzitzit. If you did not wear a four-cornered garment, you didn't violate anything. You didn't nullify a commandment. We intentionally put on a four-cornered garment because we don't want it to have the appearance of the nullification of a commandment. And because it still serves a nice purpose, even if I don't have to wear a four-cornered garment, but the purpose is that we would see it. And however, with tefillin, you do nullify a commandment if you don't put it on intentionally every day. And the more you put it on, the more you fulfill the Torah commandment. So wearing tefillin, if you're a male, you're fulfilling not just a rabbinic commandment, you're fulfilling a Torah commandment every time you put it on in its proper time. Yep. And head garment makes that more practical.
All right. You brought up for Israelite male. What about the Gentile, the Gerim, those who are learning about moving closer to Hashem and his ways? when should they start wearing them? Or should
So
they?
the answer to that would vary from rabbi to rabbi. The overly simplistic answer that would normally be given is they shouldn't do anything but just the laws of Noah. But we see in practice that doesn't work. It doesn't give people enough meaning in their everyday life. People need some kind of holidays and rituals that will add meaning to their everyday life. As far as tefillin specifically, in the Torah is specifically given to the people of Israel, as many things are. However, if we look at the only codified source of the laws of Noah that people love to simplistically refer to but not read, we'll find it in the last book of the Mishneh Torah of the Rambam, Maimonides, chapter 8 through chapter 11, chapter 10, 8 through 10. There, the Rambam says explicitly that a non-Israelite is permitted to voluntarily do other commandments in addition to the 7 laws of Noah, as long as he's doing them, not stating that he's required to do them, but he does it voluntarily because he wants the reward, whatever you think that reward may be. All right, it doesn't matter. He's allowed to do it as long as he's doing it voluntarily and not doing it to establish a new religion or to say, I am the new Israel. If he has that kind of mentality, he doesn't care what you or I say anyway, right? So we're not talking to those people. We're only speaking to people who are not intending to replace the people of Israel or invent new religions. If you're doing it voluntarily, it's fine. You can wear tefillin. I strongly discourage you from going to a synagogue wearing tefillin, because then it could certainly mislead people, and you don't want to mislead people. It's not good for them, and it's not good for you. It's not going to help you. But if you're doing it in the privacy of your own home, you certainly have my stamp of approval, as long as you're doing it kehilchata, according to halakha. You're not just inventing stuff. But I would also discourage you from recording yourself in videos wearing it. It can mislead people.
Sure. Women in tefillin.
The Rambam says explicitly, the women can wear tefillin. If a non-Jewish male can wear tefillin, a woman can wear tefillin. But in the same vein, with regard to any mitzvah that we do voluntarily, we should have in our consciousness that it's a voluntary commandment that we're doing, and you're not obligated to do it. Also, both for a non-Israelite and for a Jewish woman, also for a male, because there are things that Israelite males can voluntarily do that you don't have to do. For all sorts of voluntary commandments that we are not required to do, but we want to do, we shouldn't be doing them unless we're first being careful with the commandments that we are obligated to do. So don't be concerned about wearing tefillin if you're not yet doing your duties as they presently exist. And that's how you can know that, for example, the women of the wall who go to the Kotel, the temple, the Western Wall,
Mhm.
and they've made huge political issues of women being able to wear a talit, a prayer shawl, and tefillin. That's how you can know where their intentions are. If they're walking up to the Western Wall, which is about as holy of a place as you can get outside of the Temple Mount, and I'm not saying it has inherent holiness, but it awakens reverence more than any other place. If you're walking up to the Western Wall with your cleavage showing and like Daisy Dukes and your hair completely disheveled, I can't speak English, and you're making an issue about wearing tefillin, but you're not concerned about basic obligations, where are your priorities? You know, we can see your intentions. It's purely political. That's pure politics. Really, they don't give a flip about tefillin in that kind of a behavior. It's like a Jewish guy coming up to the Western Wall as a male and asserting his desire to, I don't know, to say Birkat Kohanim, the Aaronic blessing. He's not a Kohen, and he's making a big issue about the freedom of speech, right? Because I have the right to say the Kohen blessing even though I'm not a Kohen, while he's munching on I don't know, a crab salad or something. You know, it's the same thing. So we don't want to fall into that trap. First, our basic obligations. Yes, sir. That's it.
That's
So
it.
go out and buy yourselves a do-rag.
You got it. Everyone in do-rags next week.
It's so funny.
Thanks for sharing that. That actually helped in the expounding on the tefillin. I think that'll make it
Also,
interesting.
for making Torah accessible again, for making
Mhm.
Torah affordable again. I wouldn't recommend someone wearing a do-rag, for example, in an area or a place where you think doing so would be offensive. If you know they wouldn't be offended, then don't worry about it. If you think they may be offended, then don't do it in that place, but you can at least do it at your home. It's very practical and cheap. Make Torah affordable again. Just one of these could cost like $10 or $15. Why would you go out unless you just have the money to throw away, in which case please support the Mishnah Walk. But unless you have money to throw away, why would you do that? You can get also a hair covering at like a dollar store that is usually marketed toward Black women, which is completely fine. But unless you have something against Black women, if you're a woman and you want a hair covering, you can get a hair covering for like $2 or $3. You don't need to pay $20 or $30 to order one from Amazon. And for a male head covering, this thing costs like $2. Why do I need to spend $15 for this and it doesn't even stay on my head? You know, if I'm going to go to a regular synagogue and I don't want to, feel awkward or be mistreated by rabbis who perhaps should be in other professions, then yes, you should wear a $15 little piece of leather on your head to save yourself headaches. But at least when you're praying by yourself or going about your regular life, you can get something much more affordable. It's a lot more reasonable. There's no commandment to throw away your money and make yourself poor. If you're worried about offending people, I think if you wear it in a way that doesn't look explicitly like the way most African Americans wear it, I think that you're less likely to be perceived as trying to be mocking.
Mock them. Yeah.
Right. And I really don't think that the majority of Black Americans would be so up in arms. I really don't think so. It's the loudest voices, squeakiest wheels get the attention. Yes, you may see the loudest voices of same way you see the craziest right wingers, you also see the craziest left wingers. But the average person doesn't care to get into a conflict. And if they do, just take it off just to humor them, to save yourself a headache. If you really want an argument, then you have a problem. You really do have a problem. Just take it off, humor them until they're gone.
Yeah. Much of what we talked about here in the last few minutes is something really we're saying, okay, you can do that in your home, not even in your group fellowships. It's more of a in your privacy.
None of
These
this
are
is an
things.
obligation with the head covering. Only
Well,
when
it
you
could
pray.
also be problematic if you walk into a synagogue doing
But yeah, you want to
wearing
be
your
realistic.
phylacteries or your
Correct.
tefillin.
You want to be
and that-
realistic.
And that would be as in your study groups that you might be in. Don't overdo it. Don't over
Correct.
apply things that you don't not required to, for one.
Right.
And,
We're not required to cover our heads at all times. We're not.
Yeah.
Unless you're a Torah scholar or if you're in the middle of the Amidah. In the case of Shulchan Aruch, when you're learning Torah, you are required to learn with your head covered, but that's Shulchan Aruch. I personally don't go by Shulchan Aruch. I have great respect for it, and I do study it. I encourage people to study it at some point, but I'm not bound by the Shulchan Aruch. But if I'm in a community that respects it, then I will cover my head even though I'm not required to, because that's their local custom. And in which case, I don't feel it's a huge necessity for me to cover my head with a larger thing. I can use something smaller. But yeah, it's priorities. We need to get our priorities right. More people will be drawn to Torah if we do that.
I agree.
Yep.
All right.
Make Torah affordable again.
Make Torah great again.
Amen. I believe if we make it great again, that will include making it more affordable again.
I agree. Yeah.
And they go together.
And not a burden, but actually the easier.
A joy.
Yeah.
A joy.
Yeah.
Right. All right, you guys, let's finish off with our word of prayer. Unless anyone has any questions, let's try to limit it to like 1 or 2 minutes. If anybody has any comment or question. All right. Okay. Mr. Victor. First line. בכבוד. Make sure you're not on mute.
מודה אני לפניך.
לפניך, לפניך.
לפניך, אדוני אלוהי.
I'm grateful before you, O eternal, my God. Any other volunteer?
Sheshem. Oh,
Go ahead.
Sheshma.
Shesa, shesa, shesam,
Shesama.
shesamta,
Shesamta. He. Helm. Helki.
good, helqi,
Helki. Miyom.
yush,
Miyosh. Miyosh. Ve.
good, mi yoshve,
Miyoshve. But see here. Bait.
bit, yeah, bit,
Hamid. Hamide.
Hamid, always assume this shava is silent, unless you know for sure. Hamid,
Hamidrash.
good. Let's read it one more time. You can say after me. She samta,
Shame.
samta, helqi,
Heloki.
mi yoshve,
Miyoshve.
bit,
Bet.
hamidrash.
Hamidrash.
Yofi. All right, mihaba. Who's next? Heather?
Walo samta helki miyoshve koronos.
All right. So I am grateful before you, O eternal, my God, that you have placed my portion among those who dwell in houses of study. Wala samta halqi, and you have not placed my portion among those who sit idly on street corners. Mr. Victor.
אני,
She'ani, she'ani,
שאני, מש חיים,
kim,
משכין, והם,
mash.
משכמים,
All right, when we see a dot under a letter, that's always an E sound. Mashki meme. Let's read it again.
משקעים,
E,
משקעים,
like an E sound. E.
yeah,
Mashki.
משקיימים,
All right, and there's no yud. If there is no vowel, if there's no vowel above or below the yud, it does not make a Y sound. Mashki meme.
משכימים,
All right. Ani mashkim wehen mashkimim. For I get up early and they get up early. Mashkim means to get up early. Mi haba. Who's next? Mi haba.
I can try. Ani mashkim ledivrei Torah vehem maskimim
Mash.
mashkimim lidverim
Right? Is it lit or lead?
lead
How do you know?
of the shirik
Hirik.
underneath.
Yeah, the hirik, the dot
Here-
symbol is always an E.
Hirik.
E. Hirik. The sound of the vowel is the sound of the first vowel in the name of the vowel. Hirik makes an E. Hirik. Patah makes the sound of the first vowel in the name. Patah makes an A. Hirik makes an E. Hulam, this is a hulam. Hulam makes an O. So if you know the name of the vowel, you can always remind yourself what sound it makes. The sound of the vowel is the name of the first vowel in its name. Hirik lead. B'chavod. Go right ahead. B'chavod.
It's a habit kind of already.
I know it's better to hit it
Leonim.
in the, what do they call it? Nick it in the rear before it gets
Get in the
harder. Yeah,
And then
right.
Betelim.
Good job. All
Betelim.
right. Ani mashkim lidivre Torah. I get up early into words of Torah. Wehem mashkimim, and they get up early. Lidvorim batalim. They get up early unto the vorim batalim, empty things. Mi haba. Who's next? Mi haba.
Ani haba.
Kol hakavod.
Ani amal amel
Amel.
vahem amelim.
Perfect. Say it one more time. Tagid od pa'am.
Ani amel vahem emelim. Amalim.
Yes, amelim. Good. I work hard. With him and they, amelim, also work hard. Mi haba. Mi haba.
Ani haba'a.
Kol hakavod.
Ani omel umakabel sahar.
All right. I work hard and I receive reward. You can continue if you'd like.
Wahem omelim wa'en makabalim sahar.
Beautiful. They work hard, but they don't receive reward. Mr. Victor, ata itanu. Are you with us? Ata itanu.
Ani Rats Rachem
What?
Rechem.
Oh no, that means
Wow,
uterus.
yeah. Wachem. Wachem.
Let's make sure you pronounce the
That's-
he without friction. So not
Wha-
hem, but hem.
Wahem.
There you go.
Ratson.
One more time.
Ratson.
What vowels under the sadi?
Ratzion.
Ratzim. Ratzim.
No
Ratzim.
why.
So everybody
Ratzim.
write down in your notes if you can't recall this automatically, if you have the letter yud in a word in Hebrew, it is only pronounced as a Y sound, like yes, if there's a vowel below it or above it. If there's no vowel associated with the yud, then you can act like it's silent. Really, it's just symbolizing the vowel that you already saw under the previous letter in such a case. So if you see no vowel above or below the yud, act as if it's not there because it's already represented by the vowel under the previous letter.
Ratzim.
That's right. Let's do it one more time.
Ani. Rats. Wahem. Ratson.
One more time.
Rats.
Well,
Ratzim.
you got it. Tatzim. All right. So I run and they run. Mi hababatur. Who's next in line? Mi hababatur.
Ani haba'a.
Okay.
Ani ratz lechaye ha'olam haba
Beautiful.
vehem retzim lefer shachat.
Perfect. Ani ros lahayye ha'olam haba. I run into life of the world to come. V'hem rosim, and they run unto a pit of destruction. Yeh rosan milafonecha. May it be your will. Adonai Elohai Elohe Avotenu. O Lord my God and God of our forefathers, that you prepare us in the learning of your word with a passion and an appreciation for the beauty of the language in which you gave it, for the Hebrew language, that you endow us with the knowledge sufficient to convey the importance of your holy tongue that you have given to us, to share the importance of its learning with other people, and that by learning it, it will strengthen our appreciation for your word, the depth of your word, and save us from misapplication of erroneous interpretations, that we not forbid what is permitted and not permit what is forbidden, and keep us humble to always be willing and able to correct our misconceptions while also having patience for others, just as you have had patience with us. Nama'an Shemecha, for the sake of your name, when Umar, and everybody said,
Amen.
There you go. Shavua Tov, everyone. If you have any questions, feel free to ask on Facebook, WhatsApp, or Telegram.
YouTube.
Toda rabah. Yes, on YouTube. Be'ezrat Hashem. Kol tov, Shavua Tov.